The story begins with spears pointing at the starry sky on a battlefield, where hundreds of soldiers shout as they try to capture the demon. Suddenly, a white-haired figure appears who is too fast for any of the soldiers. Wielding a sword wrapped in a demonic aura, he unleashes overwhelming power, striking hundreds of blows. After such an explosion of power, he is left breathless. Looking tired, he hears a woman call out to him. Why? Why did you make that decision? How did you make a deal with the devil? Have you betrayed us? When he introduces himself as Nox von Reinhafer, she does not understand. Betrayal! He assumes that this is what they think, but he did not betray them, they betrayed him. The woman yells at him to come to his senses, demanding to know how long he has been like this. We are taken back in time, where an alert appears. You have completed the first part of Inner Lunatic. We see a young man who clearly never leaves his house. He nods, believing that he hasn't done so badly this time. Besides, he had collected lots of items and discovered several hidden missions, so he was happy with his performance. The only thing worrying him was that he would die next month. 2 years ago, a doctor told him not to panic, saying he had cancer and was terminally ill and had only 2 years left. The doctor could only prescribe medication to relieve his pain, and that is how he has lived until now, with no desire to do anything other than take his medication. Looking around, he felt lost. At that moment, he started coughing up blood. He believed he would indeed die soon, but he had resigned himself to it. He only ever received messages from hospitals. No one ever asked how he was or got in touch after he lost his memory. In his condition, he had no one to turn to and nowhere to go. His whole life had been miserable. Everything had been taken away from him. The only thing he could do was play the game Inner Lunatic, in which he began a new game by selecting a different player type. He selected mana sensitivity and prodigious sword and combat skills as his abilities. Then, an alert popped up to say that if he chose 2 special traits, he would receive a penalty. He selected the terminal illness trait. He smiled. If he was terminally ill, why shouldn't his character be? He pressed play. However, at that moment, everything changed. His body reacted differently. The protagonist felt that his day of death had come early and fell to the ground, feeling excruciating pain. He believes he has not had a good life, but then a window opens and his character merges with him, completing the transformation. At that moment, a white-haired person wakes up, immediately recognizes the room, and seeing his reflection, realizes that he has become his character, Nox Reinhafer. Nox belongs to the 3rd family of the Dark Family branch and is closely linked to the worst organization in that world, the Lunatics. He is the youngest of 5 siblings in the Reinhafer family. For centuries, this family has produced children who have excelled in magic and fencing, but Nox was the only one who had no talent. Because of this, his entire family treated him with contempt, and even in the game, he signed a contract with the devil to become stronger and turn into a villain. The protagonist now wonders if it was a dream. Then his statistics appear, and he complains to the game because they are very low, especially his stamina, which is only 2. This is due to his terminally ill negative trait, which affects his character. He thought he had created this character just to have someone to play with in the game, but now he is in real trouble. Suddenly, a message appears, greeting him by his real name. He doesn't understand how it knows the name his parents gave him, a name he doesn't even remember, and he wonders if it knows about his past. The message says that it has been a long time since they last saw each other, that the protagonist has done very well these last 2 years, and that he deserves to be there. It welcomes him back. The protagonist doesn't understand anything.
Now known as Nox, he gets the message that his previous world was not real, which seems absurd to him. The computer assures him that it wants to help him, but cannot give further details. Distraught, the protagonist tries to make sense of it all when the machine gives him an order to enroll in Eladan, a huge and prestigious academy where he must cultivate his powers while approaching the main story, where he is promised to find the truth. This upsets the protagonist, who tries to understand everything while looking at his reflection and sees in his face the final boss of the Inner Lunatic game, who will die in the end. This will clearly happen if you follow the main story. However, if he assumes that everything is real, it might be the only way to get his memories back. So you decide to do it. You will reach the main story to look for a connection to your memories and try to survive. Clenching his fist with determination, he affirms that he will be the greatest villain and smiles at this change. Remembering how a year ago, when his illness was discovered, his life became a macabre countdown between medications and the constant fear of dying, and how now, in this new panorama, planted in a world he knows better than his own room, he decides to begin his journey, first asking the system for the date, which is February 4th, 1812. Relieved to know the date, he is determined to avoid his death. He pushes open the doors to leave his room when his negative attributes are activated, causing him severe pain from this simple movement and the first problem in his fragile body. Annoyed, he carelessly walks around the mansion and collides with a young maid, knocking her over and breaking all the dishes. The girl and the other servants are frightened by Nox's possible reaction to the collision, while he, in pain, sees the girl on the floor and recognizes her as Lorna. Mourning and on her knees, she rushes to beg his forgiveness. Nox belittles her, considering her just another character and very gossipy, but is surprised that a gossip has such a tender face. Now in the role of the villain. He approaches her with a big smile, apologizes, and warns her not to let it happen again, which frightens the whole staff. With that, he understands that he is definitely playing his villain role well. The other servants are surprised to see him so early. They are even more confused when Nox claims that he is going to the gym and will take Lorna with him, which makes the maid feel in danger. On the way, she even thinks she will be beaten with a wooden sword. Meanwhile, the protagonist's mind reflects on how, having always been on the brink of death, now that he has a chance to survive, he must adapt to the situation, and he tells himself aloud that it is impossible, which further frightens the maid, who is confused. The protagonist returns to his internal dialogue and remembers that he has played the same game 27 times, so he knows all the hidden objects. He pauses to open the skill window and remembers the game's great popularity for the many possible combinations of attributes, including the gifted or genius categories, which allow you to rise quickly but are limited to 1. As if you exceed it, you receive a penalty. Like him, who is a genius at martial arts and mana detection, which increases his magical sensitivity, but comes with a penalty. A limited lifespan of 1 year, a weakness that causes him to faint frequently, slow attribute growth, and cold hands and feet. Lorna follows him closely as he analyzes how to solve all his problems, eventually arriving at the gym, where he pauses with a melancholy look on his face, which the maid notices. Finally determined, Nox opens the door with his first mission in mind, to free himself from the curse of weakness. Determined, he begins his training by swinging a sword, but after less than 10 movements, he faints and succumbs to weakness. He rests for a while until he gets back on his feet to admire the good condition of the weapons from the ground. Weapons are central to the Reinhafer family, represented by a silver shield. The house is remembered by a phrase, the home of darkness and the sword. This is due to his special skill, vision swordsmanship, which allows him to imbue a sword with darkness to strike down his enemies, as he did in the past with the famous Black Sword Warrior, the Supreme Victor. His sword is passed down from generation to generation by a select member of the family, but he will not inherit it, so he prefers to think of his real advantage, money. He comes from such a wealthy family that they don't care what the youngest son does or spends. After all, his character is a spoiled child who always gets his way. So when the maid comes to warn him that his request is ready, he rises from the floor. Approaching the wooden sword, the protagonist calls out to the girl, who is afraid of being hit, but only receives a whisper in her ear. She shudders, for what he is asking her to do will cost her a great deal of money. The prota decides to convince her with a gentle smile, followed by a verbal threat to obey, and the maid leaves in fright. Nox is left alone while he pours himself a cup of tea, thinking that if his maid gets everything, he will succeed in putting an end to his weakness. He drinks his cup of tea annoyed until he feels a presence behind him. It is a man with a monocle who greets him as Lord Nox. The protagonist recognizes him as Lord Rodwell of Ernaroke, the butler of his father, the head of the family, Theo von Reinhafer. Her presence makes him nervous and he shakes as he tries to figure out how to handle the situation. Luckily, the butler is only there to deliver a message to Nox that he must attend dinner that night. This does not suit the protagonist, who tries to wriggle out of it like a spoiled child, but the butler points out that they have a guest, the young lady from the Steeliner family, who will attend a chivalry lesson. Therefore, his father will be angry if his young son does not go. With no other choice, he decides to go. However, the butler keeps looking at him and tells him that he is behaving very strangely. Confused, the protagonist asks him why. Rodwell replies that it is because he has never shown any interest in wielding a sword or training. The new Nox, acting coldly, warns him not to use that as an excuse to take him to his father, as they don't care what he does or doesn't do, and then leaves. The butler apologizes, but remains suspicious, so the protagonist returns to his room still trembling, afraid that they will discover the sword. But his biggest worry is a red-haired girl who approaches him, the Steeliner Glory, a new problem. And these escalate with his twin brothers, Hats and Allen, who are annoyed by their little brother's impertinent arrival and taunt him for insulting a poor butler and a maid. Nox tries to keep his composure, though he feels guilty about the insults he didn't even utter. Everything is interrupted by a maid announcing the arrival of the other servants. Theo, his father, and behind him Thalia von Steeliner. a red-haired girl who enters beaming and happy. Theo announces that he will have her as his guest while he receives lessons in chivalry. All of this happens under the watchful eye of Nox, who knows that this woman will end up plunging a sword into his heart, thus introducing his antagonist in the game, Thalia. Theo watches in amazement as Nox appears at the banquet, which even catches the attention of the redhead, who also did not expect to see him there. Thus begins the banquet, which takes place under the gaze of the twins and Nox, who tell their father that it is time to decide who will go to the Eladon Academy. Theo knows they are right and begins to think. Meanwhile, Nox remembers that the Academy is the basis of the game, whose plot revolves around cadets fighting demons. Therefore, Nox must infiltrate the Academy and at the same time maintain the main story of the game. For this, he needs allies. Theo mentions that all noble families have only 3 places in the Academy, and his family has already used 2 of them, so there is only 1 left, which will be solved with the classic family method, a fight. To everyone's surprise, Nox is in the fight. When Theo sees this, he arranges the fight for a month from now in the gym. The twins urge Nox to surrender, as he is already defeated in his condition. The protagonist calmly and elegantly replies that they will only be able to do so if they manage to defeat him. All this while drinking wine and loudly declaring that he will enter the Academy. This arouses the surprise of his father, the fury of the twins, and the interest of Thalia, who watches him with a broad smile that frightens the protagonist, because it does not suit him to be near her. So the night comes, and Rodwell informs his boss about Nox's sudden change. Theo reads it and knows that he would not have believed it had he not witnessed it himself that night. He even thinks that he might be possessed. But even if that were the case, Theo is still intrigued and decides to see where it leads. Meanwhile, Nox begins his preparations, under the gaze and gossip of all the service staff, who don't have much faith in him. The protagonist, with a very fine ear he didn't know he had, surprisingly listens to everything. He then continues his training and manages to increase his resistance to 0.1. He is worried because his sword genius ability can only be activated with a stamina of 4, which is very easy for a normal player, but not for someone cursed like him. Therefore, in less than a month, he must increase his stamina by 1.9, which is very difficult due to his curse, which limits his growth and forces him to work twice as hard. Determined, he runs and runs until he almost dies, and he also has to deal with the little health he has left due to his limited time, a problem for another day. For now, Lorna arrives with his errand and the protagonist regains his happy and somewhat villainous attitude. He approaches the items brought by the maid, most of which are poisons, except for one, the growth scroll. The protagonist explains to the girl that even though they are poisons, it all depends on how they are used. So he proves it to her by drinking the bottle of poison from the 3-headed snake, which upsets the girl. The protagonist, half dizzy, sees his health increase as a countdown begins. Lorna, worried, tries to go after the butler, but Nox stops her and tells her to calm down, while devouring the golem core like an apple, which scares the servant even more. The core takes effect quickly, which Nox is happy about as it counteracts the poisons and activates the hidden piece effect. The golem core increases his defenses and petrifies the user, but when consumed with the 3-headed serpent's poison, it dilutes the poison and removes some of his weakness. He continues his experiments in front of a worried maid who thinks her patron is about to meet Saint Peter. However, the opposite is the case as the protagonist begins to undress in front of her, who watches him with narrowed eyes. Lorna, her face flushed, watches as the protagonist pours the water from the fairy spring in a somewhat suggestive manner, which also eliminates the effect of the golem core and achieves the hidden piece effect again. This makes him smile with satisfaction, especially when he gets the Blessing of Growth skill, which doubles his growth rate. All that's left is to use the Scroll of Stamina Enhancement, which also doubles the growth speed and manages to stop the curse for the time being. She can now level up. Lorna, on the other hand, comes screaming, worried about him because she thought his sensual modeling from earlier was due to the poison damaging his brain. The prota lets this comment pass as he is happy about his achievement. The maid, worried, asks the protagonist what he is going to do. He answers that he will run, so he begins his training, accompanied by his faithful assistant who runs after him. In the distance, Thalia and her wardrobe assistant Emma are watching him. The redhead, annoyed, watches Nox's training and considers him an incompetent weakling who should not have accepted the fight. Emma suggests that he not be insulted since he is the son of the owner of the house. Thalia continues to complain and watches as the protagonist runs around like a fool without even a little training with the sword, even though the vassals of the house have offered to train him. She knows that only a sure beating awaits him, not understanding his feelings or why he cares so much about them. She leaves in high spirits to introduce herself to Nox, who is lying on the floor with her lady-in-waiting unconscious behind her. The redhead greets him with a big sweet smile, while Nox, as cold as possible and wondering why she is looking for him, stands up and answers her in a curt manner. Talia, surprised by the coldness, thinks that maybe she made him nervous with her beauty, but Nox just ignores her. The girl changes her attitude and tells him very seriously that he will not win the fight if he does not train with the sword. Then the red-haired girl offers to help him defeat his older brothers. The protagonist immediately rejects her and leaves, angering Thalia, who doesn't understand how he treated her when he only wanted to help her. She leaves with a shove, while Lorna watches the women hate her employer. Nox is left confused, while Lorna calls him a scoundrel. Nox decides to check Thalia's stats, which are very good. She masters the fire element, has a lot of charm and positive traits such as admiration for heroes, honesty, and her genius with the sword. However, as a neutral trait, she has an undeveloped sense of inferiority. Although the protagonist does not pay attention to the latter, as he only focuses on the incredible endurance of 5, which surpasses an ordinary adult man. In addition, although she is not the strongest sword genius, she is above the lower level. She also has the fire attribute, which she will develop in the future to create a powerful white flame with which she will burn Nox's character, the Prota, alive. Unfortunately, she cannot be an ally for him, as it would change the story of the game too much, and it is better to keep distance from the one who will kill him in the future. As Thalia walks sadly down the corridor, she remembers how her teachers congratulated her on her quick learning and recognized her as a talent worthy of her family. This reminds her of how she sees her older sister as superior to her abilities. This fills her with sadness, and she grips her sword tightly, wondering if she can really be a knight. In this world, being a knight means being austere, not feeling greed, and sacrificing oneself for justice, as well as learning many swordsmanship techniques. With this in mind, he thinks again of Nox, who has no chance of defeating those he has trained for years. Thus comes the day of the showdown, where Nox and Alan are in the arena in front of everyone, especially Priscilla, the twins' mother, but not Nox. Theo and Rodwell are also present, and Rodwell asks Theo the difficult question of how he feels about the duel. Rodwell replies that the winner will be Alan, surprised that Theo thinks otherwise, knowing that even if Nox behaved differently, he would need more practice and training to win. Either way, the only way he could win would be with a natural talent so great that they doubt Nox has it. On the other hand, Theo still trusts Nox. After all, he comes from the Reinhafer family and believes that he might have a talent that rivals that of the Grandmasters. Meanwhile, Nox remembers that the day before, despite all his efforts, he only managed a 3.8 in stamina. As he rests, his favorite maid expresses how tired she is of running with him. But the protagonist gives her a big smile and tells her that it wouldn't be fun to run without her, which makes the maid pout. The training continues, but the protagonist's curiosity is so great that he decides to see the abilities of Lorna, who with the same training as him already has 4.5 endurance, which annoys Nox because of the genetic advantage of this family. Lorna catches up with him and tells him that he should rest because the duel will take place the next day. And so we come to the duel, where Alan tells his little brother to give up before he hits him so hard to impress Thalia. When the protagonist sees that Alan has a health of 8 and is very interested in showing off, he understands that he will not be able to win with conventional methods. The moment becomes tense when the referee indicates that whoever loses must accept the result without discussion. If Nox loses, he will lose his last chance to regain his memories, and in just 1 year, it will all be over. Without further ado, the referee begins the match. Nox lunges forward, but when Alan hits him with a punch, Nox dodges it and falls to the ground. He then blocks a powerful blow that causes him to retreat. His brother doesn't wait long to attack again, while Nox just blocks, thinking about what he'll lose if he misses, until his health increases by 0.1. With only 1 more to unlock his ability, Nox tells himself he can do it. Alan looks at him like he's crazy and decides to put him in his place with punches. The fight continues while Theo's first wife watches calmly, certain that Nox doesn't stand a chance. This way, she would guarantee that her son would be the one to go to the academy and become the head of the family in the future. Theo, meanwhile, is disappointed by Nox's pathetic performance, and Rodwell suggests that he stop the fight or Nox will suffer too much damage. Meanwhile, the protagonist remains trapped, resisting and realizing that his brother has decent talent but is far behind the best, especially Garam, the master of the Black Sword, who leaves his enemies so frightened that they give up. Just as Theo stands up to stop the fight, Nox feels his health increase by 0.1 again, coursing through his entire body. At that moment, his ability activates and he smiles as sparks begin to fly around him. To the astonished look of his father, Nox activates the ability Time of Genius, which creates a gigantic shield of light that covers him like an aura, dimming the surroundings. Everything around him moves slowly. Determined, he draws his sword and swings it to disarm Alan, who cannot believe what is happening, while Nox assures him with a look of confidence that he will win the fight. The sword flies through the air, and Alan holds his wrist in pain as he watches Nox approach him with a confident air. Even though he knows inside that he can't be confident because the ability that gives him the advantage can only be used for 5 minutes and he has to finish the fight in that time. Changing his attitude to a more haughty one, Nox tells his brother that he's been holding back until now, but he's bored of the fight, so he's inviting them to a 2-on-1. This suits him because if he doesn't defeat them in that time, he will lose. This statement surprises the twins, and Nox formally asks Theo to make it official. Rodwell and Thalia don't understand what he's doing, while their father watches in fascination, seeing that he still has tricks up his sleeve. Despite his wife's complaints, he decides to allow the 2-on-1 and resumes the fight. Hats picks up his sword and stands next to his brother Alan, determined to attack and angry at being humiliated in front of their father, while Nox waits with a broad smile of confidence. The twins attack with all their might, but Nox easily blocks them. Meanwhile, the brothers seem to be coordinating to attack as a team. The protagonist moves quickly, dodging and blocking, and then he hears the system tell him that his skill with the dark sword has increased. Confident, he makes a move so fast that he disappears from the twins' sight, who only feel a strong blow to their arms. Nox appears in the middle of the battlefield, smiling to the surprise of everyone present, including Thalia. The protagonist returns to his rivals and finds a completely different expression on their faces. Hesitantly, they even begin to argue with each other. Nox seizes the opportunity to continue his attack. He begins to push them back, thinking that although the fight is for an important goal, he has not stopped having fun. In front of everyone's astonished eyes, one of the twins falls backwards and hits the ground next to his brother. With both of them on the ground, unable to get up, just as the protagonist's skill is finished, in time to confidently say that the fight is over and ask the referee to announce the result, declaring him the winner, much to the annoyance of the twins' mother. The brothers accept the result without further ado, while Theo and his son exchange respectful glances. With a final bow, Nox prepares to leave the arena as Thalia runs after him in desperation. Now, out of everyone's sight, Nox is exhausted and coughs up blood from overusing his ability. This gives him a temporary buff that can also cause him to permanently lose health, specifically 2 days, so it is recognized as the worst debuff. At least he is satisfied that the effect did not occur sooner, as it would have jeopardized his acceptance into the academy. Relieved until he hears a voice. It is Thalia, who approaches him with great concern, asking him if he is injured from the fight that damages the protagonist's plans. He thinks Thalia knows about his debuff and can't let her father find out, but the girl actually congratulates him on winning the fight at a disadvantage with such a damaged body. Nervously claiming to have misunderstood, she blushes and draws closer, remembering how for a month she watched an inept man practice with a wooden sword. And now, seeing him win, she understands that he has a hidden talent and wants to know how to awaken it. But when she sees him after the fight, with his look of loneliness, she understands that Nox is good for nothing, but truly strives to win. Now, genuinely concerned, Thalia wants to take care of him, but Nox stops her hand with a strong blow and yells at her not to touch him. Yo-chan, the real Nox, admits in his mind that being terminally ill and obsessed with games, he's not very good with girls, and even worse with a character who will burn him in the future. But Thalia doesn't get upset. In fact, she apologizes. This surprises the protagonist, who listens to her apology and, realizing that she was only doing a resistance exercise to counteract her innate weakness, asks her forgiveness for thinking that she was acting like a useless person. The protagonist, confused, does not know how to respond, seeing her as a girl with the honesty characteristic of a gentleman, but with great pride, which must make it difficult for him to admit a mistake. So he simply asks her to keep the bleeding a secret. And the redhead agrees when she sees the protagonist leaving and tells her it's a promise, which makes the girl blush. Meanwhile, Theo is proud of his son's talent and talks to Rodwell, who, though confused by the initial beating the protagonist took, believes his ability to win would be enough to rank him among the best young swordsmen. Theo nods, assuming Nox is still hiding things, and sends his butler to keep an eye on him without interfering. He ponders whether his son might be the next heir to the Black Sword. It is a title he hopes to achieve in the little time he has left, and he entrusts Rodwell with the mission of finding out. Meanwhile, in his room, Nox sees that even though this world is real, the game system remains the same, and he receives a reward for winning his first fight, 3 free points, which would have been very useful to avoid his month of training. But now he won't need them for stamina, but for luck. The only attribute that can't be trained and the most important one in the game, he decides it's time to try his luck. So in a sort of magical lottery, he decides to spin it, hoping that with maximum luck he will get an advanced skill in the form of a scroll, which can be normal for lower skill, silver for intermediate, gold for higher, and iris for advanced. He chooses advanced or higher and is lucky enough to receive a golden scroll that grants him the ability Supreme Sovereign's Awe, which causes enemies with stats lower than his to take a 20% debuff. With this new ability, he must decide what to do with his one-time skill voucher. Perhaps he will reserve it for the family reunion. Thinking that graduation from the Eladan Academy has probably already happened, he remembers Nox von Reinhafer, the second son of the family, who will also cause him trouble in his search for an important family peace. His only peace of mind is not having to worry about Thalia, trusting that she will not break her promise and that there's no reason for her to approach him now. Or so he thought for a few hours until the girl reappears and confronts him to find out how she became so strong so quickly. But Nox passes her by without a thought, telling her that she has already seen him training secretly this month. This saddens the girl, but she doesn't give up and insists that he teach her how to train. Seeing her insistence, Nox remembers something from Thalia's character file. She wants to be recognized by her sister, so he looks at her and tells her that before she asks for that, she should think about how talented she already is, causing him severe pain from this simple movement. And Nox gives her a cheerful look and tells her that she shouldn't compare herself to others, which makes her blush. As he leaves, nervous that Thalia will follow him, he realizes that he doesn't want her to see him while he searches for the family piece. From a distance, he sees his father with the whole family gathered in the barn, famous for raising the best horses. Theo has gathered his children to choose their equine companion who will always be with them. In this world, horses are considered sacred companions and remain with the rider for life. In addition to being necessary for riding lessons at the academy and for the final part of the game where major wars are fought, and a means of transportation that is not as expensive as teleportation magic is essential, it all seems unnecessarily realistic to him. Determined to choose the best horse, Nox is rewarded by his father for winning the duel, allowing him to choose first. He enters the stable and gazes at the horses. A dark gray, his chosen one, approaches. This surprises everyone, even his father, who offers him another chance, suggesting that he might be making a mistake. But when Nox looks at the horse's stats, he realizes that it is of high rank. The horse belongs to the obsidian category, which makes it extremely rare and an excellent choice for his father, except that it has a negative trait called expected death, which gives it only a few days to live. Nevertheless, Nox decides to keep the horse, confident that his knowledge will save it. Theo thinks this is a bad decision, assuming that his son is projecting himself onto the horse and sees it as pathetic sentimentality and disappointment. He warns him that he won't regret it and leaves, leaving the twins surprised that he didn't stick around to see his decision. Rodwell tells Nox that he must choose a name for the horse, and he names it Carl, the name he used when he was just a player. They both end up in Nox's room, where he had to do something no one else could see. But when she looks into the horse's eyes, she remembers her own, full of that spark that indicates the will to live. So she begins her plan, calling out to Lorna, who had overheard her hiding outside her room. She enters a bit awkwardly and ends up on the floor again, surprised to be caught. Nox just wonders why the maid keeps falling down. But the important thing now is that she has to take care of the horse, which annoys her since she is in charge of cleaning the room. But Nox convinces her, even though in her mind she thinks that what's about to happen might be a shock for her, and she doesn't know if she'll be able to handle it since she seems to get attached to the horse. 3 days later, Lorna tearfully tells Nox that Carl has died. The protagonist looks at her calmly and with some pity, remembering that the maid was trying hard to take care of the horse and feeling sorry for her. He begs her to control herself as she distracts him, but she insists that Carl is gone. Nox confidently assures her that he will bring him back, which again makes Lorna think he is crazy. This only causes her to stand behind him as he pulls out a scroll and injects her with mana, creating a large purple rune on the floor. The rune disappears, and Lorna is surprised to see that she can use mana, thinking that maybe what she is doing is illegal. Nox suggests that she keep her mouth shut if she wants to keep Carl from dying a second time because of her. The girl obeys, while Nox concentrates knowing she hasn't unlocked her ability to detect mana yet. Keep in mind that what he is doing is actually illegal, as those under the age of 15 are forbidden to learn how to use mana, except for members of the Imperial family, who are much more proficient in magic due to learning from a young age. Nox can only inject as much mana as he can into the scroll until he reaches a point where he injects his one-time skill bonus and activates his black magic to use the ability from the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. Thanks to this ability, he will be able to resurrect Carl as an undead. In this world, there are two types of undead: those resurrected by black magic or dark mana, and those resurrected without an ego, as beings 1,000 times stronger. In either case, they will be loyal to their masters forever. The problem is that only the dark family of mages, the Marvas, should be able to use abilities to revive and control undead. Although Nox's family belongs to the dark category, they can only be knights. But thanks to his bonus, Nox was able to use the Necronomicon, and the dark energies began to envelop them both. Nox feels a lot of pressure and spurts blood from his mouth, which worries Lorna, but he silences her as there is little left even though his mana is running low. It looks like he's going to give up, but after being shrouded in shadows, Carl stands up and whinnies shrilly at the sight of Nox, who now sees him as a large, imposing horse with a mane of fire, thus successfully activating the skill. Concerned, Lorna approaches while Nox checks Carl's abilities and confirms that his negative trait has disappeared. Satisfied, he tells the horse that he will be its master. At that moment, Lorna, worried about Nox's reckless use of mana and Carl's refusal to accept the scolding, rushes to hug them both, setting off a fight between the maid and the zombie horse. Happy now, the protagonist thinks about his next step: to look for the piece. A few days later, in the dark of the night, he decides to search for it. With his map, he easily finds a glowing rock and continues on his way in search of a special piece of his family, which seems to be a ring that will be useful in fighting his time limit. So he follows his path to a place he is afraid to enter, since this is theoretically his real world and not a game. When he reads the warning sign, he realizes that he is about to enter a cursed forest where he could die. The protagonist enters the forest of the missing girl, where he must clear everything or die. This is a forbidden place because of the thick fog that can confuse anyone, no matter how skilled they are, and make them lose their way like children. But that is not the real difficulty, for the monsters are the greatest challenge. If an adult confronts them, he will not get any rewards, and the difficulty will increase, making it very difficult to fight them. The protagonist admits that he died many times in the game before he figured it out, and gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars for difficulty. In a previous life, he actually did it to learn, not knowing what items would be obtained in this scenario. Luckily he did, because it's perfect for fighting his terminal illness. So he starts by lighting a giant torch to illuminate the area and takes his first step: follow the smoke, or rather the opposite direction. In this way, he starts to look in that direction and discovers something. Not getting any answer, he orders him to stop hiding, and, not getting it, decides to attack with his sword. We return a bit earlier to Thalia, who is still upset that her beauty had no effect on Nox, who has become obsessed with her. Emma is very worried about this obsession, as she might get a scolding as well. However, the redhead assures her that she won't lose her job, which doesn't reassure her at all. Then Emma thinks that Thalia is so respected that she could be the next matriarch of the family if it weren't for her sister Cher, but that's no reason to get impatient. Since she can't do anything else, she assumes that Thalia has given up and gone to sleep. When she gets to the room, however, she finds no one and trembles with fear at the thought that she might have gone after Nox, so she wakes up the entire staff to look for her. On his way back to the forest, Nox pauses before attacking and discovers that the one following him is Thalia. He asks her what she is doing there, but she, acting innocent, does not answer. However, everything will have to wait, as Nox stands in front of her to protect her from a huge gray wolf in a forest full of them, while the redhead has only a dagger to defend herself. At first, the wolves don't even notice them, as they just start communicating with each other, and more wolves respond. Nox lunges at the closest one and kills it easily, which surprises Thalia. He asks her very seriously why she followed him, assuming that if anyone would, it would be her brothers. The girl, still playing the role of an innocent child, suggests that she was just out for a night walk. With this answer, the impatient Nox decides to leave her alone. Thalia's reaction is to take him by the arm and start explaining to him, a little upset and kawaii, that she was thinking about how strong Nox had suddenly become when she saw him sneaking out of the mansion. She decided to follow him into the forest without much thought, believing it to be his secret training method. Hearing this, Nox is relieved because he knows 3 things: that Thalia doesn't take him seriously, that she doesn't want to kill him, and that she's a little girl who doesn't understand how dangerous it is to follow someone into the forest. Since she is a central character in the game, he can't leave her behind. So, with his arrogant attitude, he makes it clear to Thalia that he doesn't want to help her. He just wants to prevent his family's reputation from being affected if something happens to her, which the little redhead finds embarrassing. Nox thinks he will never do anything dangerous again with this level of contempt, but she surprises him by showing her gratitude. She is about to say something important when hundreds of wolves suddenly appear and interrupt the moment. Thalia, frightened, sticks very close to the protagonist, who pushes her away, knowing that she will be in his way in the fight. As she thinks about how she must continue with her plan even with this delay, knowing that they have not yet entered the main story and that they are still in a prologue where there will be no final boss, but a kind of evolution of the gray wolf she just eliminated, the elite gray wolf. Though he admits that as much as he knows what's coming, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. The wolves charge him, but his sword fends them off. Without backing down, knowing that he's cornered, he slashes as many as he can, remembering how he told himself he was a damn weakling when he was Yu-chan playing the game. Meanwhile, Thalia watches him in awe. After seeing all the wolves he's defeated, assuming that he hasn't unleashed his full power yet like he did in the gym fight, she feels that the protagonist sees her as a burden, since she can only drive away the wolves with fire. The battle continues with the arrival of the elite Grey Wolf. Back at the edge of the forest, a group searches for the boys and finds their tracks, indicating that they have gone into the forest. Everyone is very worried that they've really decided to go in, especially Emma, who wants to go in right away to rescue Thalia, but Rodwell stops her, as even the Reinhafer family hasn't cleared the forest yet. The butler realizes that as one of the most powerful dark families in the South, admitting that they cannot clear a forest would be tantamount to incompetence, so they have never made it public. Also, the fact that only children can enter and clear the forest has never been revealed to the people. He does not understand why Nox entered the forest, as he does not believe that he was lured there by a mind-controlling monster or that anyone else could have broken through the barrier. Given how carefully he entered, he concludes that he did so intentionally. Rodwell is forced to admit that Nox is no longer the fragile master he once was, and that the only way for them to get out of the forest is for the young master to use all of his wisdom. At this, Emma falls to her knees in tears, thinking that she has caused Thalia's death. Meanwhile, Thalia is still in the forest and now draws her dagger to defend herself. Nox, seeing her concentrated, is calm and warns her not to attack if it is not necessary. However, the protagonist only thinks that Thalia could be useful to him, since killing a Grey Wolf is not that complicated, and she has learned to defend herself well. Still, he cannot count on her to cover his back. He needs to clear the area quickly and activate his Genie Time skill to move forward, but a wolf wastes no time and runs straight at him, surprising the protagonist, who hits it with a slash and kills it. This will stop the wolves. Until the elite, Wolf sends more troops to surround the protagonist, who begins to cut them down with shields. However, one passes through a blind spot and lunges directly at his back. With no chance to react, Nox only sees a dagger pierce the wolf at the last second. It's from Thalia, who's screaming at him to watch out. She, on a tree with several wolves below, thinks of Nox's words when he told her to run away if the situation became dangerous, something she bravely refuses to do. She leaves the protagonist surprised, who looks at her as she asks him if he is alright. Still in shock at having received help, the protagonist watches her until he senses an enemy and eliminates it in one move. He knows better than to be overconfident, so he tells Thalia that he's fine, which relieves her. He thinks he has shown her his pathetic side and tries to stay focused, but his hands start to shake. The debuff is coming, and he still has to deal with the elite wolf. It comes closer and closer, stalking its prey until, looking directly at him, it charges at full speed. The protagonist waits for it, but the wolf changes direction at the last second, passes by his side, cuts his arm, and hides in the dense forest. Thalia is worried about Nox, who is also very worried, as he thinks this situation is much more complicated than in the game, with a cunning wolf taking him by surprise. The elite wolf not only controls the other wolves, but also takes advantage of the terrain, so now he has to get serious. He anticipates his move and throws a big punch, thinking he has him, but the wolf easily dodges it. The protagonist realizes that it was all a trap to create an opening now that he is off balance. On top of the fact that his body is in so much pain that he is spitting up blood from the debuff, unable to react, he sees the wolf's large fangs closing in on him. He regrets being so confident, having passed the game so many times before, believing he could handle anything they threw at him. A very foolish idea for someone like him. Fortunately, a dagger pierces his eye before the wolf devours his face. Surprised, Nox notices that an opening has been created thanks to Thalia, so he throws himself through the elite dog with all his strength until it ceases to exist. Without strength, Nox is unable to pull his sword from the wolf and falls to the ground, spitting blood in front of a worried Thalia who quickly rushes from the tree to help him. She looks at him with tears in her eyes and thanks him for his help, but cuts herself off mid-sentence when she remembers that she will end up destroying him in the future, so she reverts to her cold demeanor. With tears in her eyes, she insists on asking him if he is alright. He tells her that he is fine. Thalia feels more relieved until she feels something on her arm. A spider, of which she seems to have a great phobia, which makes her scream loudly. The protagonist wakes up thinking that another monster has appeared, but all he sees is Thalia throwing herself into his arms. Thalia, very frightened, says there is a spider and sees it again, clinging even tighter to an uncomfortable Nox, surprised by her fear of spiders. He wonders why he followed it into the forest if he's afraid of something so small. So he drops the spider and tells the redhead that he has little faith in her as a knight, to which Thalia responds by pouting and pushing him away. When Thalia regains her composure, the protagonist coughs up blood again, which worries her again. Nox, knowing that it's his debuff, pretends that all is well. When he sees Thalia, whom he can't tell, he turns out to be very grateful to her for helping him survive. As he recovers, he tells her that they should get out of the forest because it's starting to light up. Outside, Emma is still crying for Thalia, and Rodwell is also very worried about the problems this will cause between the families, adding to the bad reputation they already have for not being able to clear the forest sooner. Everyone is surprised when the fog in the forest begins to dissipate amidst a huge wave of glowing mana that rises in front of everyone present. Everyone understands that the forest has been cleared. To everyone's surprise, Nox and Thalia emerge from the forest. Rodwell sees them smiling as he confirms that the hierarchy in the offspring has just changed in favor of the Proto, who just then sees all the cavalry and thinks that they were really worried about Thalia, who quickly gets a big hug from Emma. Rodwell also comes over to tell her that his family was worried too, which makes Nox think that the Dark family is getting soft when it comes to worrying about a good-for-nothing like him. Emma continues to cry in Thalia's arms until her demeanor changes from concern to anger, as she raises her with one hand and says she will reprimand her by reminding her of the family rules. Nox, in the distance, notices the great strength of the maid, who reminds him of the unsuspecting Lorna. Emma tells her that the reprimand will come from her father and goes over to thank Nox for taking care of Thalia, who claims she wasn't trying to, which makes Thalia feel like a burden until the protagonist assures her that she took care of herself. We move on to Nox's room, where she is resting and remembering what happened. Then we move on to the most important thing, the hidden piece, an accessory he won while clearing the forest, the Ring of Black Flame, which increases stamina and mana and has a great special effect. It grants a portion of the life force of the enemies he defeats, which increases depending on the enemy's rank. He plans to use it to prolong his life, but it won't be much since he won't be able to steal small amounts of energy, and it will be difficult for him to overcome the disease. He is at least comforted to have a little hope to keep fighting. As soon as he has it in his hand, he calls Lorna, who has been spying on him outside the room. She enters clumsily as usual, thinking that the protagonist can see through walls. He tells her maybe, which makes the maid think she's already told him the whole plot, which only gets her a safe. What Nox wants is for them to arm wrestle, with a confident Lorna betting on a raise or a pay cut. The maid, very calm, prepares, but Nox easily defeats her, so she goes into kawaii mode to ask her, on her honor as a noblewoman, not to lower her salary. But since Lorna loves gossip and the protagonist's reputation isn't very noble, she doesn't care about such things. He basks in his victory until karma takes its toll with the activation of his negative trait, recurrent illness, causing him to suffer a broken wrist and the flu. As a result, he changes his mind about Lorna's salary and asks her to bring him some ice. She immediately realizes that Nox is ill, but he tells her to rest. Meanwhile, something inside the system seems to be watching him and learning his true identity. So 6 months pass with Carl and the ring in his possession, both hidden pieces that he has not even been able to use because he is being punished. The punishment is unfair, as he feels that clearing the forest should have been a reward. He asks Lorna, who agrees but can't say anything against the patriarch because of his salary. Nox tells her that it is he who controls her salary. When the maid complains, Nox thinks he hasn't wasted any time. Time passes, and realizing that he has only a few days to live, he decides to go talk to his father just as Rodwell arrives to tell him that Theo is looking for him. We see a flashback of Theo when he was young, standing on a battlefield where a great massacre has taken place as hundreds of flying demons approach. The patriarch attacks in fury with his dark sword. Theo remembers that disastrous day and seems to sink into darkness until he opens his eyes and remembers that one day, one of his sons must learn to use the black sword, and it must be someone of pure talent. It must be soon, for that person must also send him to the next world. These thoughts are interrupted by his steward, who tells him that Nox will be arriving soon. The patriarch is annoyed by the delay and thinks of his son's feat in clearing the forest, something he himself could not do and which deserved a reward, but the vassals objected and ordered an investigation of Nox, which confirmed that it was he who cleared the forest. Shortly thereafter, Nox arrives and is greeted with respect. The patriarch wastes no time in telling him that his actions were not right, but it is his duty to reward what deserves it. So the reward will be a request. Nox, who had never seen Theo give a reward and feared it was a trap, was confused. Theo clarifies that he can make a request, whatever it is, but if it is too far-fetched, he will reconsider his offer. Nox says that he won't ask for anything out of the ordinary, but that he should think about it. Theo agrees and leaves him free to leave the mansion without getting into trouble. The next day, Thalia says goodbye to Nox at the door of the mansion and tells him that she will see him again at the academy. He tries to ignore her, but Thalia repeats her words to him and continues the same game until Rodwell tells him that he must answer the lady. Instead of answering kindly, he tells her that he will only see her if she becomes a complete gentlewoman, stops being afraid of spiders, and makes fun of what happened in the forest, which provokes a punch in Thalia's stomach. Thalia, annoyed, assures him that she will see him again as a full knight and tells him to get ready, which the protagonist understands as a death threat until Emma interrupts them to thank him for saving Thalia. Nox, still with his cold attitude, declares that he never intended to save her and wants to get out of here. As the carriage departs, Nox seems a bit homesick, enjoying his new life, which reminds him that he only has 146 days left to live it, so he has no time to rest. Days later, Lorna tells Nox that she needs to hire new staff, just as Rodwell arrives to introduce her to an assistant sent from the Eladan Academy. She will be his exclusive maid, Lovilia. The protagonist seems to recognize her when he sees her character sheet, which states that she has good stats, being a support genius. The downside is that she is duplicitous, an expert liar and spy whose current job is to keep an eye on the protagonist on her father's orders. With only 140 days left to live, the protagonist thinks that the less time he has, the faster it seems to pass. Although he has improved his stats, he is now about to enter the academy. While Lorna is fixing the protagonist's clothes, she asks him if he is nervous about his school life. He thinks he's just happy because he's leaving her alone. Lorna pretends to cry and says she'll miss him, but is glad when he assures her that he won't touch her salary, which upsets her. However, he does not have time to bully her, as she will not survive at the academy if she does not raise her stats. He thinks about the academy, where the strongest cadets in the country gather, and the need to survive in order to advance in the story, while trying to maintain his role as the villain. With Lovilia's arrival, he knows that he will now be watched by her. Nox remembers how Theo rose so high, not only because of his mastery of the sword, but also because of his ability to distrust everyone. We see her prostrating herself before an imposing patriarch who tells her that he has high expectations of her mission. If she does a good job, she will position herself very well in her family's line of succession. Lovilia vows to help Nox wholeheartedly, but sensing Theo's aura, she realizes that he doesn't want her to help him, but to watch him and report on his every move. Lovilia remembers Theo's words, which made it clear to her that she must not forget who her true master is. Outside the room, Lovilia tries to calm herself as she looks at a medallion that appears to contain an image of a couple, promising herself not to hesitate. Meanwhile, Nox rests, now aware that he has a spy nearby, and that Theo seems to suspect that he may be the victim of possession, a common occurrence in this world. He also knows that in the original story, it is Baal, the first demon, who actually possesses Nox's body. He knows that the problem is Jitri Lovelia, a minor character in the main story, but with a sad history behind her. She was originally the next in line in her family until her parents were killed by her uncle, causing her to lose her place in the line of succession and escape as a maid to the Reinhafers. Lovelia looks sweet and cheerful on the outside, but inside she is jaded and on the verge of becoming a broken character, having made only one major decision before the main story begins: to take her own life. This puts the protagonist at a crossroads, as he must decide whether it is wise to save a character who is destined to die so as not to disrupt the main story, and even worse, if doing so could put a noose around his neck. The next day, Nox makes a decision and takes his 2 maids to hunt monsters in the area. Lorna tries to escape by pretending to be ill, but Lovelia readily agrees. Lorna tries to convince her not to obey like this, but Lovelia seems calm. Nox knows that it is normal for a maid to be frightened when hunting monsters. He realizes that it is a ridiculous request, but even though Lovelia's hands are shaking, she immediately agrees. The protagonist decides to play a little game with Lorna, telling her that she cannot sneak away and claim to be ill, or he will deduct part of her annual salary. Left with no other choice, Lorna tearfully asks if she needs a bow or sword. Nox smiles, but her joy is cut short when the blonde asks if she can tell Rodwell about her trip. Nox has no choice but to agree, as his priority now is to increase his life expectancy, and so they set off on their adventure. After a few days, they come to a forest where a few days ago there was a missing child, but now it is a normal forest. Nox takes it upon himself to eliminate the creatures in the area and wipe them all out. After a long hunt, he manages to extend his life by at least 2 hours, thinking that at least this is working. However, Jiri Lovelia interrupts him, offering him water and asking if he is not tired after an hour of hunting. This disappoints him, as by taking so long and not activating his ability, he has only gained an extra hour of life. He feels that he cannot hunt every hour of the day and that there are few opponents. During his days of hunting, he has killed all the wolves whose bodies Lorna finds on her walks. With this in mind, he feels that his plan is failing and thinks aloud that it is a pity that he does not have any more monsters, which surprises the maids, who find him a little strange. With no other choice, he decides to return to the mansion. Jiri, very proactive, tells him that she will run his bath, and he thanks her. She gives him a big, warm smile in return. Lorna tries to be proactive as well, but the protagonist is not interested. Nox focuses on Jiri and asks her a very simple question: who do you serve? This freezes the maid, who doesn't know how to answer, so Nox knows that no matter how big and beautiful a sword is, if she can't use it, she won't hesitate to throw it away. With the maid's hesitation, he knows the answer. She tries to explain, but he has no more questions. Happy that at least she had not lied to him, Jiri continues to tremble. I don't care who you serve, he tells her. I will still see you as one of my people, and I will offer you help if you need it. Jiri remains crestfallen, kneeling on the ground. As night falls, Lorna complains about her employer in the maid's quarters. Jiri plays along, thinking that she has heard about Nox's change since she was with her family, and does not understand how someone can change so much in such a short time. He marvels at how she has risen through the ranks of the family, unlike him, who has been relegated to the bottom of the ladder despite being the rightful heir. Clutching her medallion, she thinks about what Nox told her, though she does not understand what he meant. Knowing that she is not worthy to serve this family either, and that her family is looking for her to finish destroying her, she knows that she will soon be fired. In the face of all this, she maintains her cheerful facade and enters the room where all the staff are, who seem to be aware of her situation. She holds her ground, feeling the contempt in everyone's eyes until Lorna arrives, outrageous as always, to find her. Jiri thinks that Lorna either doesn't know or doesn't care about her situation. Either way, the scandalous maid is making a mistake by behaving this way towards her. Lorna doesn't seem to mind, as she takes her by the hand and leads her away. The blonde maid follows with a weak smile and a dull look, thinking that she, Lorna, and Nox are just fooling around. In his room, Nox reads the letter accusing Jiri's father of many crimes that he knows to be false. A letter that Theo has surely already received. He is aware that he cannot help even if he wants to, as this could have repercussions for the rest of the game. Sometime later, Lorna and Jiri, hidden in the bushes, watch Nox hunting wolves. Lorna is the one who notices that her master is very different that day, showing a total lack of mercy that worries Jiri. On the other hand, Nox is worried because although he has killed many monsters, the random boss in the area, who only appears when there are few monsters left, has not yet appeared. He needs to face it to increase his stats. but he thinks it will not appear again when something suddenly happens at full speed. It's exactly what he expected. A large elite hornet that looks fast to him, but nothing he can't handle. He begins to fight the creature, which pushes him back. Confident, Nox waits for the next attack. Before it strikes, Jiri intercepts the large stinger with her body and is seriously wounded in front of the astonished eyes of the protagonist, who does not understand why he intervened in a blow that would not really hit him. He decides to approach her and admire her bravery, since few people would jump in front of a monster to save another person, knowing that they must return to the mansion. As Jiri lies on the ground with a large chest wound and almost no strength, she thinks Nox's concern is a lie, knowing it's just someone taking advantage of her. However, he finds it strange that Nox's voice has a tone of anger. Theo finishes reading the letter with the crimes of Jiri's father, information that Rodwell confirms. The patriarch believes that since his goal with the blonde maid was always to take control of the Lavilia family, which was in an unstable line of succession, he used her as a pawn for the Reinhafers to succeed in taking it over. However, his plan is about to be thwarted, as implied by the letter, which strips him of all rights as a direct descendant, thus thwarting his plan. So now they discuss with Rodwell what they should do. He suggests that bringing a maiden with no family to the academy with Nox would give them a bad reputation. They are interrupted by a servant who warns them that Nox has returned with a maiden in critical condition due to injury and poisoning, for which the protagonist has used a very expensive antidote without permission. Rodwell thinks it is the mandrake potion, which is indeed very expensive, and Theo thinks that his son has become attached to the maid and that such feelings could have negative consequences. Meanwhile, Jiri wakes up with blurred vision and hears the loud screams and cries of Lorna, who is by his side, worried. The blonde maiden, still confused, asks about Nox and remembers when she was injured. Lorna explains that she was taken there and Nox used a very good antidote on her, though she can't even say what it was, so she even argued and threatened the doctor, thinking that her master still had a very good side. Jiri, confused, wonders why he would do that if he was only supposed to use it. So she gets up to go find him, much to the concern of Lorna, leaving the other maid in the room to rest. Jiri doesn't. Instead, she gets up and takes out her suitcase to start packing. Thinking she doesn't deserve to be anywhere, she takes the picture of her parents out of her locket and leaves it with a letter to Nox, thanking him for saving her and repaying him with the locket for the antidote he used. Meanwhile, she tries to sneak away when she meets the protagonist, who asks her where she is going. We go back a bit to Nox's argument with the doctor, who cannot use the antidote without the patriarch's permission. Nox then tells him to administer it and that he will take care of Theo. Jitri receives the antidote and Nox leaves, watched by Lorna, who is very surprised. She is told to tell him as soon as the blonde maid wakes up. When he finds Theo, he knows that Nox is there thanks to the maid. The protagonist prepares for the conversation by activating his Master of Acting ability and uses his eloquence to ask her for the wish she granted him earlier. Theo accepts his request. Nox, somewhat shaken by the fading effect of his ability, asks his father in a more personal way to stop messing with his mind. We return to the confrontation between Nox and Jitri. He insists on knowing where he is going. She shakily thanks him for what he has done, but he must go. He insists on knowing why she wants to leave and not stay as his maid. The blonde confesses that from the beginning, the patriarch ordered her to keep an eye on him, so she deceived him and begins to cry. The protagonist does not flinch. She angrily repeats that she deceived him. Nox recognizes this altered state as Jitri's true personality, a girl who does not give up even in dark times. Therefore, he tells her that cheating is very common in this place, claims that she has committed a great offense against him, and demands that she leave without paying him. She does not understand him, so the protagonist explains that he will stay there even without a surname because he is not interested in her relatives but in her talents. As he passes by her, he tells her that he wants her to help him until he pays for his betrayal. She feels a great relief, lights up, and bursts into tears, understanding her master and agreeing to stay with him until the end. Then she reminds him of her earlier question. Whom does she serve? Turning to the protagonist with a broad smile and eyes full of tears, he tells him that he now knows whom he serves. And Nox says with a smile that he already knows. The next day, Lorna is gossiping about the protagonist as usual when Nox arrives and tells her to at least say it behind his back. Feeling trapped, she decides to notice G-Tree and tells him to rest while she goes to do the laundry. Nox thinks about what a troublemaker Lorna is and then talks to G-Tree to tell him that they are going to Elidan in 2 months. She assures him that she has all the preparations ready, while her master notices that the maid no longer tries to smile because she is tired of acting, so he trusts that they will not betray each other, even if they are pressed together with their backs to each other, and gives them a sincere smile. Although G-Tree is not very calm about the new rumors about Nox, he is worried because it means they are worse than the ones that already existed, which he thought was impossible. The maid tells him that some people think he kept her as a maid because he likes her. The protagonist is relieved to hear that's all it is, as he doesn't think much of it, but apologizes to G-Tree for involving her. She claims that she only told him because it might make him uncomfortable. He is very calm, as with his reputation as an idiot, spoiled and incompetent, no other rumor could affect him. The blonde maid tries to minimize the rumors. He threatens to throw her out if she is not truthful, so she reveals her biggest rumor that he is a pervert, which ends up embarrassing Nox. Despite all the rumors, Nox thinks his reputation is improving, from useless to a capable spoiled brat, which doesn't suit him as the game's villain, who has to outshine the protagonist. Therefore, he must stick to his plan. After putting the rumors to rest, Nox, knowing that G-Tree's character is very loyal, trusts her with his plans and asks for her help to study magic before entering the academy, which shocks the maid, who knows that it is illegal. However, she decides to accept when she sees her master's cheeky and carefree attitude, so she will find books for him to learn, much to the delight of Nox, who is quickly distracted by the commotion outside the house, as the servants run around with preparations to welcome the family's second son, Grain, an event of utmost importance to the protagonist, as he believes it will prolong his life, and informs her that he will be leaving on a distant mission, to which she looks worried. Then we go to dinner, where Theo and Grain talk. There is also Nox, who looks at his brother's skill sheet and discovers the skills effective detention, quick thinking, and thorough, as well as his negative traits: lust, materialism, hypocrisy, contempt, and aristocratic opportunism. Nox sees him as someone with a good facade, but also as a lousy person whose negative attitude he overshadows. He knows, however, that he must be wary of his social, political, and gambling skills, which allowed him to graduate with ease from the academy, a place where very few enter and only half graduate. Meanwhile, Theo talks to Grain about his trip to Cheaters. The older brother confirms that he has been assigned a monster hunting mission in the neutral zone on the border of Tigerlan, an undeveloped desert that serves as a border and is not only barren but also plagued by monsters. So Grain received a mission from the Arkham Empire to become a knight and take charge of stopping a wave of monsters in the area, a dangerous mission that Grain seems to find easy. Theo, on the other hand, is worried, but only to make sure he doesn't fail so as not to tarnish the family name. Nox, who is watching the whole thing, remembers that this mission is vital for the story, as it is a subplot that connects several storylines, so he decides to intervene and gets up to ask his older brother to go with him. Grain explains to him that there will be monsters and bandits, but he does not seem to be interested, so the Major, surprised, tells Nox what he has heard about him lately. This alarms the protagonist, who has to be careful with his ability Precise Detention, which allows him to recognize people's intentions. Thus begins an interrogation about Nox's accomplishments, from his victory over the twins to how he and Thalia cleaned up through the forest, to why he took in a girl without a family. All the while, Nox nods with a broad smile. The conversation ends when Theo abruptly interrupts and tells Grain to take Nox on his mission, which is an order. He assures him that he will give him everything he needs for the mission, which unsettles Nox, who suspects that his father is up to something. Grain interrupts his thoughts and prepares to attack him when G-Tree appears and accidentally spills wine on Nox's jacket. This prompts Grain to release him. The protagonist takes the opportunity to go to his room with Jiri and leaves without saying anything to his brother, promising to see him in 3 days for the mission. Once out of this predicament, the protagonist thanks the maid, who only acknowledges that her boss is good at getting into trouble and expresses her concern about his mission. The protagonist tells her not to worry. The one who is worried, and very much so, is Lorna, who greets Nox with a loud shout about the mission. He remains calm in the face of her worries because Chater is a place full of monsters and bandits, something the Prota celebrates inwardly, since this way he will be able to prolong his life, even though he continues to maintain his serene attitude outwardly, affirming that he will go alone. Jiri interrupts him to tell him that as his exclusive handmaiden, he has to make sure that he is safe, so he will go even if he might get hurt, knowing that he has to take care of the sick Nox. Thus begins a bombardment that makes him feel useless, reminding him that he is weak, forgetful, and apparently not good at keeping his clothes clean. All these little things he had forgotten while playing the game because they weren't part of the gameplay, to which he adds that if he were to die, the blonde maid would be in danger, so he agrees on the condition that he learns how to use a sword. The girl accepts, admitting that she has already gotten close to Carl's horse, which annoys Lorna, who asks her how she got it. The blonde maid replies that she used part of her salary to win his affection with premium sugar cubes. Lorna regards her as a selfish beast, like her owner, who gives her a safe and then indicates that she will indeed stay. Unsettled by his concern, her thoughts are interrupted by Rodwell, who informs her that Theo has sent her a book. Thinking that Theo is up to something, Nox decides to go to him. Once there, the patriarch hands him a sword that Nox is not sure he can lift. When he sees it, Nox is surprised because it is the sword of the first head of the family, an object that has never appeared in the game and that he has never encountered in his 27 virtual games. This makes him hesitate, feeling confused and undecided about whether to take it. Theo notices this and explains to him that he is looking at the sword that the first leader has been wielding all his life. The protagonist, confused, asks him what kind of test it is. The test is simply to raise the sword. The protagonist agrees and immediately wields it. Then the sword begins to absorb his dark magic, changing its color and turning it into a black sword, just as Theo had told him would happen, as it absorbs the magical powers of the wielder and multiplies them to make the sword much stronger. Then Nox understands that it is a difficult sword to use, but at that moment he opens his eyes in surprise as he receives a warning that his magic is rapidly depleting, so much so that even his ability has begun to go haywire. So he understands that something bad will happen when his magic runs out. But Theo tells him that he must hold the sword for at least 10 minutes if he wants to receive it, and tells him its name, Stormbringer. The sword continues to absorb his power while the system tells him its attributes. It absorbs the wearer's magic and power, and it can absorb mana from the enemies it defeats. When Nox's magic is depleted, it begins to absorb his life force and strength, reducing his life expectancy by the second. This fills the protagonist's face with fear, and he wants to let go of the sword to avoid dying. But his hands do not obey him. Nox curses Theo, who looks at him sternly, believing that this sword will lead its wielder to destruction in exchange for power equal to that pain. The sword belonged to the first patriarch who founded the family. Since then, he has found no one among his descendants who can use it. Most of the users collapsed when they touched it. Even he lasted only an hour. So he knows that if Nox can last the 10 minutes, he can use it, at the risk of it being used by the most useless junior member of the family. He only does this because of the great changes that have occurred recently. Theo accepts that Nox has grown up and could be as talented as the 3 Sword Emperors, and is confident that he could be the next patriarch and the one to end his life. Theo is pleased to recognize the protagonist's power and confirms that the sword is now his, while watching Nox stab the sword into the ground with a look of hatred and exhaustion. Nox, for his part, feels weakened and angry at losing another few days of life. Fortunately, the 3 days pass quickly, and he begins his journey to Chaders in the midst of a caravan of knights led by Grain. Nox rides alongside Jiri, who seems happy to be able to carry all his luggage in a subspace bag given to him by his father, along with the sword that brings back bad memories of the days of life he lost. When he sees that Grain is loaded with several of Theo's belongings, which appear to be his payment for carrying him, the caravan stops when the guides start arguing because they seem to be lost. Grain arrives with them, annoyed because he hired the knight Ron to guide them. Ron seems to agree. Nox notices this and approaches them with a big confident smile and offers to find the way. Grain does not trust him since he has never left the mansion, but he knows that he will be humiliated if he is wrong, so he lets him try. Later, back at camp, Grain yells at his guides for being beaten by a boy who has never left home without understanding how he did it. His shouts echo throughout the camp and reach the ears of Nox, who calmly thinks it was easy for him to find a path he has traveled so many times in the game. Though Jiri believes Nox's explanation is that he followed the trail of the Buhoso monster, whose habitat is in the south. The maiden fears that it is dangerous to be near a creature that is half owl and half bear, but as long as there is fire, all will be well, says the protagonist. Later, many in the squadron begin to claim that the younger brother is surpassing the elder. Upon hearing this, Grain talks to his butler, Schultz, and together they hatch a plan to test Nox's strength. To this end, his butler brings out a mysterious bag that he claims will give the protagonist a long night. Jiri and Nox go to bed in his tent, but Nox does not sleep, sitting with the Stormbringer in his hands and listening to the sounds of the forest. He knows it is time and leaves the tent, leaving his butler inside. When he goes outside, he encounters 4 male ogres and quickly notices that the tent has ogre pheromones mixed in with the dirt, which has attracted the ogres. To his brother, they would be intimidating monsters. To Nox, they are mere life points, and he prepares for the attack, charging his dark sword, which seems to respond well. The ogres rush at him, and with great speed, he leaps to attack from the sky. As he falls, he takes out one of the ogres. The others swoop down, and he eliminates them with great speed, feeling how useful his sword is. Although he is still a little afraid that it will leave him without mana again, his confidence grows, and he lunges at an ogre, finishing it off with a slash. He leaves the ogre's face red and full of confidence. Seeing that he has only one left, and that it is trying to flee in terror, he calls to Carl, who quickly appears with his great mane of fire to charge Nox and go at full speed to rip the ogre to shreds. So his gain from the fight was 9 hours of life. Jiri leaves the tent, concerned about Nox's complaints that she should stay inside. The servant girl, seeing the scene, suggests alerting the others. The protagonist tells her that no one else is in danger but them, since Grain used pheromones to attract the ogres. The maid then deduces that they wanted to keep the protagonist at bay, which the protagonist himself accepts since his older brother surely wanted to try it. But such dirty tactics do not matter to Nox, who takes some blood from the ogres, which attracts more ogres. Since they are human-like, they will seek revenge for their fallen comrades. A short distance away, the rest of the camp sleeps peacefully. Grain is awakened by the loud sound of a mana detector detecting nearby monsters, which makes no sense to him since they have not yet entered the forest. Assuming the detector is faulty, Grain waits until his frightened butler enters and tells him they must evacuate. They both emerge from the tent upset, only to see what their butler tells them. Ogres have invaded the camp. Grain, terrified, just watches the scene. By dawn, several ogres have been defeated and many wounded, forcing them to regroup. Elsewhere, Grain continues to scold his steward for making a mistake in the tent and luring the ogres in, though he claims he made no mistake. Elsewhere, Nox, very calm, goes to eat with his maid, who claims she cannot take such liberties due to staff protocol. He convinces her when he tells her that it is not good for him to be away when dozens of ogres appear, as happened in Grain's camp. The blonde maid sees him as a villain. The protagonist suggests that he should get used to it. Grain orders the camp to be broken up, and while eating, Nox sees ogre bloodstains on the tents. Jiri notices and asks him if he will help them if more ogres come. Nox has no intention of doing so, but he can't tell her that because his maid would be angry. His intention is to have more ogres to increase his life. So, after dinner, he sees the sun rise and tells his maid that it is time to leave. Meanwhile, an ogre walks through the forest and is easily torn apart by a complete stranger. So begins the second day of the journey. Nox rides along, pounding the ground with a stick to scout the terrain. His brother approaches him to ask what he plans to do with the ogres. The protagonist's solution is to leave the forest as soon as possible to avoid problems. Grain is not very convinced. And just then the protagonist wonders why he ended up in command of the soldiers, who seem to admire him and speak well of him, until one asks him why he keeps pounding the ground. The answer, along with a broad smile, is that monsters will appear at any moment. Just as everything begins to shake, a gigantic worm known as a malformed dragon emerges from the ground. It is the monster I was expecting, although it has no magic, but brute strength. Its danger is greater than that of a dozen orcs, a difficult opponent he wanted to face, although it doesn't suit him to let the party know that he called it to the ground. Now his plan is to hide. The soldiers are surprised by this decision, but Nox tells them that he prefers his enemies to face each other, as he just had a plan that involved the ogres following them. Just then, the ogres appear, putting them between a rock and a hard place, which frightens Jiri. Her master reassures her by telling her that the confrontation will be between their two enemies, as the worm feeds mainly on orcs, and these are vengeful, so they will be facing a battle of arch enemies. Just then, the worm begins to devour the orcs, who defend themselves by launching an attack. While everyone else hides, Grain cannot understand how Nox had all this information. On the other hand, Jiri, still surprised and frightened, sees the protagonist start throwing stones at the orcs, although she cannot explain anything to him, since he has to attack the orcs at least once to get the experience from the worm's kills. He manages to increase his stats slightly and gains 8 hours of health, but it's all over very quickly. Nox doesn't believe it, and neither does the rest of the team. Grain thinks that even though he used the ogres, they lost because he sees no chance of winning and wants to retreat, but Nox orders the group to attack. The strategy is to shoot arrows or spears into the mouth of the worm. The brave soldiers obey and distract the monster, while the protagonist activates his genius time ability. Feeling that time is slowing down, he runs through the arrows to cut the worm several times, even flying over it, only to do it again and cut it further, falling to the ground with a big grin as the giant worm explodes, gaining 10 more days of life, leaving him with 122. With his stamina at 5, the curse of weakness disappears along with the blessing of growth. Suddenly, everyone begins to congratulate him. He politely thanks the soldiers for their help. They congratulate him with cheers. Everything changes when the earth shakes again with the appearance of another worm that surprises Nox. Everyone panics and moves to their positions, but before they can react, someone appears at full speed and slashes the worm. Nox recognizes him and wonders what he is doing there. The newcomer introduces himself with a big smile and a monocle to the astonished looks of everyone. He is the sword genius and the strongest character of Inner Lunatic, one of the sword emperors along with Theo and a disciple of Celsus whose name is Paracelsus. With a broad smile, he patiently waits for the nobles to thank him for saving them. His attitude towards Nox clearly reflects his hatred for the nobles. Schultz feels that they have insulted his master, so the monocle boy introduces himself only as a mercenary. Nox continues to watch him without saying anything, thinking that he understands his hatred for the nobles. His only concern is that he shouldn't have met him until the academy, and he doesn't understand how he should react to that. Anyway, they continue their journey with Paracelsus joining them and leading them. Grain approaches him to talk to him and discovers that he is also going to Chaytor's. Nox still listens to him from a distance and assumes that the monocle boy will enter the academy before him. Meanwhile, his older brother, seeing the mercenary's confidence, decides to offer him a job to help them hunt. Grain is not interested, but admits that he is interested in the two brothers because they are the sons of the sword master, Theo. Grain's butler finds this rude and confronts him, but his boss stops him to tell the mercenary to think about his offer. His real intention, however, is that if he recruits him, it will distract from Nox. Sometime later, they arrive at Chaytor's, a place that, according to the protagonist, is much more deserted than in the game. A small, dirty girl asks them for food, but Grain is haughty. Nox ignores her somewhat uncomfortably, and Paracelsus looks at her with concern. He does nothing, but his face changes to one of surprise when a man suddenly appears in front of them. It is Tygan, the village security chief, who greets the two brothers. Paracelsus looks at them with curiosity from a distance, because even though they are masters of the sword and can handle a giant worm with good techniques, they are still noblemen's proteges, which makes them a disappointment, especially in this town that seems to be barely functioning and whose knights manage it by embezzling funds to fill their stomachs, causing starvation in the town. Tiagen shows them where they will spend the night and gives them their mission for the next day, and they all begin to settle in. Paracelsus approaches Grain to decline his offer and continue with his original plan, wishing them luck, which annoys the older brother, who recognizes him as just an annoying commoner. The latter simply takes his leave, telling them that rumors follow the competent. Nox sees him from a distance and feels that he will surely see him again. As night falls, Nox prepares to sleep in his room, from where he sees through a window several small children around a bonfire. Among them, he recognizes the girl from earlier. Faced with this, he decides to go downstairs and bring them some food, but he knows he can't do much. He feels that this is an act of kindness from his true self. When he sees the little ones crying with happiness as they eat, he thinks he wants to create a world where they don't have to beg for food. To do that, he must first survive. In the distance, someone is watching him as he distributes the bread. It is Jiri, happy to see that his employer is only acting coldly, but deep down he is not. The next day, on their way to the village, Tegan explains that they are asking the imperial family for help during the winter to protect what is left of the village, which is obviously in need of repairs. Nox listens and remembers that the village will be destroyed when the first wave of monsters arrives. Since it's a sub-story, he can decide whether to save it or not, and it won't affect the main story. However, he would always save it because that town will have great value in the future. Tegan continues with his explanation of the increase in monsters, which the protagonist says will also benefit him in the future. The real problem is the sighting of a griffin, which everyone knows will complicate things, since even the protagonist knows that it is a monster created to scare, not to defeat, and is recognized as the king of the desert. But for the protagonist, it is the next prey he will eliminate. Arriving at the desert spot that connects the neutral zone with Tahalan, Nox observes the place and begins to talk to Tegan about why a griffin would be in a place so different from its habitat. The city guards break into a cold sweat without answering, prompting Nox to realize who the traitor might be and launch a new submission to destroy the rotten part of the city. Back in the village, Schutz, angered by Nox's humiliation of him in front of his boss, decides to take revenge. When he sees Jiri, he approaches her aggressively, cuts her off, and then grabs her arm. She asks him if he has a problem, and he replies that he does, since he lost his master's trust because of Nox. Now he will have fun with his maid. With a sadistic smile, he begins to touch her. Jiri wants to react, but stops herself when she remembers that if she does, she will cause trouble for her master and his family. She decides to surrender and cries. A quick slash separates them, to the surprise of the maid, who sees the butler fall to the ground. They hear a voice saying that if he feels he owes her anything, he will gladly pay her back. Just name the method. With that, Schutz decides to threaten the protagonist, saying that Grain will not stop the aggression, which only makes Nox more angry. For the threat, he cuts off his arm in one fell swoop. Schutz insists that he will not get away with this, as he will be punished by the family. Nox, calmly and with a sadistic touch, tells him that it is he who does not understand his place, and, to end his pain, plunges his sword into him. In front of a worried maid who thinks of the consequences if Grain finds out, he appears justifiably upset, with his entourage behind him. Much of the blame lies with Nox, and he claims that he had a good reason. The older brother allows him to explain what happened to see if his actions were justified. So Nox tells what happened, how he felt insulted when the butler tried to make a pass at his maid, something he, as master, would not allow. Grain does not accept this, as she is only a commoner. These words unleash the protagonist's fury, who, releasing a tenebrous aura and an intimidating look, frightens his brother and everyone in the room. He then asks his brother to be his father, who will decide if his actions deserve punishment when they finish the mission. His brother, terrified, agrees. Nox leaves with his maid, while Grain decides to take care of his brother. Now, outside the inn, Nox sees Lavila still distraught over what happened, which makes him think that this will also further divide the squadron and that they will have to decide who to follow, him or his brother. But aside from that, Nox approaches her maid to tell her that as the maid of the useless youngest son of the family, she orders her not to lower her head anywhere. Back at the inn, the soldiers celebrate by drinking ale, while Grain, still annoyed, realizes that Nox is a very real problem. With no one he trusts left to watch over him, he wonders who to give the mission to, especially since he thinks the sword he carries is his father's. His thoughts are interrupted by Ron, his guide, who informs him that the situation is now under control and that Nox is nothing like what he had heard. Grain also distrusts Ron, as he considers someone who has only read books to be better than a trained soldier in the area. Wondering if it is good to trust him, he decides to use him after the monster wave. He orders him to clean up the area and keep an eye on Nox. The latter is very quiet while his assistant collects potions and prepares to go in search of a new ally, Elena, the potion expert and the only cool character in town. They search for her through a dark subway tunnel. The maid doubts that this is the home of a potion expert. Nox knows she has her reasons for being there, other than it's a secret route into the city and the only time to recruit Elena before she has another patron. This doesn't dispel the maid's disbelief until they finally see a light and find Alina in a room. She is so drunk that when she sees the duo enter and Nox introduces himself with the best smile he has, she freaks out in an exaggerated manner. The genie's attitude disappoints Jiri. After the initial scare and when Nox identifies himself as a noble, the girl calms down and listens to the protagonist's proposal. He checks her statistics. Alina is a 21-year-old half-elf, main element wood, a genie with the possibility of growth, with many good qualities in potions and craftsmanship, and the ability of the blessing of crafting. However, her great negative trait is that she's quite fond of drinking, which eventually annoys the protagonist, who thinks that this is the best a useless man like him can recruit. With no other choice, he keeps her, although poor Alina is a bit scared and apologizes just in case. After debating with his maid whether it is a good idea to recruit her, Nox decides to ask her to go with him, offering her whatever she needs most. She refuses, saying that she still has something to do there. The protagonist asks her if it is for her friend May. She is startled and stands up to ask him how he knew. He calmly tells her that he knows May will be executed soon, but that he might be able to save her if she accepts his offer. With a malicious look, he asks her if she has changed her mind. Alina thinks about Nox's offer and about her only friend May, who seems to have been a girl who fought against injustice and claimed the head of the guard for embezzling the Empire's funds. She suffers for not being able to save her friend then and doubts that she can save her friend now, even with the help of the protagonist. Still, she knows that she won't be able to forget the affair for a long time. Meanwhile, the soldiers enjoy the good wine, especially the leader Ron and his group, who are not really knights but trickster bandits who tricked Grain and plan to kidnap him for ransom, although one of them doubts the wisdom of messing with such a dangerous dark family. After discussing the possibility that they might be in trouble, the leader reassures them that they will have a life of luxury. They prepare for a life of luxury and continue to drink. Suddenly, the place goes dark. The bandits quickly become alert, but before they can react, the leader feels a liquid splash in his face. Without realizing it, one of his companions has literally lost his head in the darkness. Trying to reorganize himself, he moves only to find another completely finished. Nox appears angrily behind the leader. The leader, completely confused, tries to attack, but the protagonist moves easily and calls them rats. Despite the fact that the bandits outnumber them, they make it seem like they're at a disadvantage. But the protagonist knows about their crimes, their alliance with Tegan to embezzle funds, and of course their attempt to deceive his brother. Although they try to negotiate when they hear this, since he will get a better position in the family, they will just have to look the other way and not get involved in the conflict. Then the soldiers attack him, but they are easily defeated. With a victorious smile, he knew he could not hide his murderous intentions, which made him angry. Two more try to attack him, but he dodges them. Then, with light, graceful movements, he sends them into the afterlife. Nox stands effortlessly in front of Ron, and Ron is frustrated that he didn't know the boy's true power. Deciding to attack with all his might before he dies, he prepares himself and emits a large blue aura. The protagonist waits for him next to one of Ron's henchmen when his captain launches his attack, a giant mana slash called Chader's Southern Sword Slash. The protagonist sees it coming, annoyed by the naivete of his enemy, and disperses the bandit's mega technique with a simple slash of his sword. The bandits can't believe it, especially the one on the ground, who regains consciousness just as Nox eliminates him. Nox now walks up to Ron with an air of authority. He complains that the bandits were stupid enough to ask him what he wanted when he already had it. Nox smiles as his purple aura emits a faint flash, and the system indicates that he has learned Chader's sword technique. Taking his position and preparing the technique before Ron's gaze, the protagonist closes his eyes as he ponders what it means to be a genius. He is transported to a white stage where he sees his reflection and wonders if a genius is someone exceptional or someone who can reach a level that no one else can. Looking at his reflection, he remembers that ever since he risked his life, he has always wondered what it really means to be a genius. He touches his reflection, which explodes, revealing the darkness behind the mirror, which cheers him up. Back in the battle, Nox unleashes Chader's sword slash, which destroys all the bandits in its path. They try in vain to escape, calling for help from their captain, who is on his knees watching Nox master a technique that took him 10 years to learn. He sees Nox coming towards him and jumps back in horror, shouting that if he kills him, Tegan will have his revenge. Nox is amused by this, knowing that there are no witnesses to see him destroy them, though the bandit still holds out hope that some will survive. The protagonist, very serious, tells him that this is a simple murder. Smiling sadistically, he explains that if no one lives to tell the tale, it will only be an extermination. At Ron's blank stare, Nox braces himself with a broad smile and tells him that is what the world will think, swinging his sword at the bandit. Elsewhere, May is chained to a wall and being abused by Tegan, who is upset because she doesn't want to work or be sold. Despite her injuries, the woman smiles and tells him that she will never obey men like him. Tegan covers her mouth, preventing her from speaking, and reminds her that she has no other options. The only ones for humble people like her are to fight on the ground. May spits at her. Tegan, confused at first, flies into a rage and hits her hard, threatening to sell her to a black magician. The girl, whose eyes do not sparkle, begins to remember how her teacher would tell her after a failed lesson that she had no talent for mixing potions, which meant the last try for her. It confirmed that she had no talent, since she failed at alchemy and fencing, unlike Alina, whom her teacher had praised at a young age and considered a genius. May saw Alina as someone who didn't belong there, with a bright spark that shone through. Despite this, Alina always sought her out to play, so May ended up envying her friend's bright smile and decided to sacrifice herself in her place because her friend would do more in the world than she would. Once she accepts this, she tells Tegan that she doesn't mind fighting on the ground because that's how she's lived her whole life, and that she doesn't care what happens to her after she dies, as she taunts him by sticking out her tongue. Tegan's blows continue, hurting May, when a voice interrupts them. It is Nox's, telling the girl to stop doing things that hurt her, or he will make Alina sad when she comes out lifeless. Tegan sees him coming, smiling, as the protagonist explains to her that he will be executed by authorization of the Imperial family law. What Nox got after the destruction of the bandit Ron suggests him to surrender. The corrupt soldier sees it as an accident, accepts the situation, and realizes that he only went there to carry out the order. At Nox's affirmation, the corrupt guard feels slighted by the nobleman, and at his rival's broad smile of confidence, he draws his sword in anger and calls his troops to eliminate the protagonist. They rush him. Nox only waits for them, closing his eyes to activate his Genius Hour ability. The cogwheels move and the soldiers slow down. With a 5-minute counter, the protagonist starts to walk between the soldiers and cuts them down in less than a second. With the second two, he finds himself in front of the cell where Tegan and May are. Tegan is still in attack mode. In seconds 3, 4, and 5, she enters the cell and caresses the prisoner's face, deactivating the technique with 4 minutes and 55 seconds remaining. Nox hands a potion to May, who is too blurred to ask him who he is. He introduces himself and assures her that everything will be over when she wakes up. Tegan, on the other hand, is surprised to see that she has run out of soldiers and tries to move, falling heavily to the ground. Nox reveals that he cut off both his legs on the bloody way. From there, Tegan sees the massacre caused by his rival, who tells him that he will not die easily. Shattered, legless, and in the terrifying presence of the protagonist, the corrupt soldier is filled with fear and disbelief at the realization that he is lost to a brat. Nox, on the other hand, wonders once again what it means to be a genius. Returning to his mind where he broke the mirror, he sees his shadow envelop what's left of the humiliated Tegan, preparing to finish him off. As he watches his rival, he realizes that the question is for the real Yuchan, not Nox, the genius character, and finds his answer. He then proceeds to destroy his rival. Before the cut, Tegan foreshadows his death by recalling how he was the most respected mercenary in Chaders, inspired by his father, the leader of the town, a respected man everyone wanted to be like. But in his memories, we only see a violent man who abuses a woman and asks his son why he thinks everyone follows him. Young Tegan, innocent at the time, did not know why. His father grabs his head while holding the woman's hair and explains that it is by force. With great power, you can do whatever you want and get away with it. That is the law of the strongest in the border towns of the Empire. The boy asks him if he is the strongest on the continent, and the man's smile fades. Releasing the boy and the woman, he admits that he too is a nobody on the continent, as there are powerful swordsmen and even boys of Tegan's age who are already geniuses. His father assures him that he is still alive because he chose not to face them. Back in the present, Tegan is a corrupt soldier who did not follow his father's advice and, seeing an unattainable genius in front of him, understands why he is dying now. He takes the final stab and breathes his last under Nox's cold gaze. On the secret path, Elena is sad until she hears Jiri's voice, which surprises her. Next to her is May, who has a broad smile on her face. The alcoholic elf tearfully rushes to embrace her friend, who comforts her at the thought of her selfishness in wanting to do things alone and leave her friend behind. Jiri watches them, happy when Elena asks her where Nox is to thank her. The maid tells her that the master is busy having a heart-to-heart with her brother. She says this with a reassuring smile, but inside she is very worried, as it seems that Nox does not want to have a peaceful talk. Just then, Grain sits and waits for Ron's report. Instead, Nox arrives and asks to speak. His brother refuses him at first, until he notices that Nox has red stains on his clothes and a murderous look and aura. He finally agrees to speak with him. Back at the Reinhafer mansion, Rodwell reads a letter in which Nox asks him for permission to root out Chater's corruption and offers a reward. The butler, confused, gives the letter to Theo, who thinks that while the corruption there is still growing, no one cares because there is no financial gain in it. Although it is still a headache for the imperial family, as it is the last line of defense in the south, if it falls, the monsters would quickly pass through and reach the center, so they cannot abandon it and constantly send resources and mercenaries to that worthless wasteland, which they cannot leave unprotected. Finally, he admits to Rodwell that the bandits in Tygan are dangerous, and he doesn't think Grain can handle them. The strangest thing is why Nox would have the generous heart to want to clean up the place. Theo, who knows how dangerous the Rons are, sees a victory as unlikely, so he suggests to the protagonist that if he fails, he would be willing to give up his rights as the youngest son of the family. Rodwell asks him if he will accept his resignation. Theo, who is very cheerful, believes that he is capable of cleaning up the city and taking over its jurisdiction, and sees it as an opportunity for him to see what his son is like when running a territory. Rodwell understands and begins making arrangements for the Empire to hand over Chater's to them, leaving Theo to wonder what his son is really up to. Back in Chater's, Grain overhears his subordinate's plan to betray him. Furious at the betrayal and at Nox's competence, he begins to fear him. Grain must remain calm, for if he does not succeed in this mission, he will not be able to become a knight. So he accepts his brother's offer. Nox suggests that all he wants is control of his troops. Grain immediately accepts, as he already feels that his life depends on Nox. But in return, he asks him to guarantee his life and the credit for the victory. Nox agrees, and since there are two demands, he asks for something more. So his brother finally gives him his mind. Later, back in Alina's laboratory, she reads the protagonist's requests, which include a metallizing potion and a corrosion potion. The half-elf and her friend explain that they have never done this before, but that it is possible. This pleases Jiri, who, though only a maiden, asks her master why he wants to finish the griffin. The other two girls agree, as they don't want to lose their hero for anything. Nox says that if it were not possible, she would not try. He is aware that they would all be in danger if he were to die, so he understands their concern. Therefore, he prefers not to tell them that he really wants something out of the fight and tells them not to ask him anymore. Jiri and the others accept this, but they don't seem very convinced. Even Nox thinks that killing the griffin at the beginning of the game is something no one has ever done before. So he starts explaining the plan to the girls, showing them the routes and the moves they will make. The girls remain attentive to his explanation until he finishes and asks them if they have understood everything. The girls say yes, and they have nothing left to do but prepare for the execution. He thinks about how complicated the target is and what a great reward there is. Later, while feeding Carl, he continues to think that defeating the griffin is the only way to survive. At this moment, the wind changes. The protagonist, from the height of the barrier, sees the monsters approaching in large numbers. Behind him are all the defenders, Elena and her friend, Grain, and soldiers. Nox, as leader, reminds them that they have no more chances, so they must be ready. They all answer that they are ready for battle. At this, Nox feels a strange sense of unfamiliarity, as if he has truly become Nox of Reinhafer, the ultimate strategist standing before the troops. Jiri approaches to impress upon him the danger. He interrupts her with great confidence, telling her to trust that her master will not die, leaving her speechless before launching himself from the top of the wall. Meanwhile, he thinks that the moment he truly changed, was when he made that promise, a promise he can never keep because he is terminally ill. He hurls himself at the monsters, throwing a small purple orb that hits a steel monster as it begins to melt, liquidating it with ease. By doing so, he increases his stats in Chater's sword skill, while thinking that without his promise, he will probably die. When a horde of monsters rushes towards him, he asks them to serve as a stepping stone to regain his life and tears them apart. Confident and smiling, he finishes off the monsters, thinking that if he manages to defeat them all, he will be able to enjoy the game, which is now his real life for a while longer. He cannot contain his joy when he sees a gigantic figure appear in the sky. The protagonist sees it as a victory. The battle has finally come and he gets into an attack posture. The giant bird approaches while Nox is still smiling and everyone else is worried. The protagonist moves in, leaving several monsters easily shattered. From a distance, Elena is amazed that a human can fight like that, and May is also amazed that their movements are so fast that they can't even follow them with their eyes, and wonders what kind of people the Reinhafer are. Jiri interjects and explains that they are a family full of swordmasters who are fighting to determine who will be the next heir. She also excitedly states that young Nox is the most talented candidate. Grain hears this and gets a huge headache. The maid thinks to herself that Nox is not dismissing the rumors. Without paying attention to the blonde's thoughts, May understands just in time that the rumors about the protagonist are not true and that he has his reasons for remaining a good-for-nothing, which the maid doesn't quite understand. Nevertheless, she asks her to keep it a secret that her master is someone capable, should that be the case. Elena understands and says with a big smile that she will keep this secret. The warm atmosphere is replaced by fear as the griffin's loud growl fills the air, filling Grain and his troops with dread. The griffin stands before Nox. From a distance, Grain recognizes it as a true madman. The battle begins with the bird's attack. The protagonist dodges and tries to strike at full speed, but his enemy is faster and avoids him by flying. The older brother, for his part, thinks of simply following his brother's plan and orders the troops to attack the griffin with the ballistae when it is close to the walls. This makes Grain feel safe. Just as the griffin flies through the air and into range of the cannon, Grain gives the order and they fire. The giant bird takes the full impact, leaving a hole in its wing. It plummets to the ground under the gaze of Nox, who knows the only way to defeat the griffin is to shoot it down. He drinks the metallizing potion, which increases its resistance and attacks. Remembering how they decided during his conversation with his brother that he would take care of the ballistas, which Grain found low and cowardly, he asks someone else to take charge. Nox assigns him the task of distracting the griffin. Immediately, the older brother follows his instincts and goes to the ballistas. On the battlefield, he sees the griffin on the ground and thinks all he needs now is for Elena's potion to take effect. He watches as the griffin reacts and takes flight, soaring until something in its wing fails and it falls with a crash, sending up a cloud of dust. Then Nox's shadow approaches and asks the griffin if he is frustrated that a wound that should not affect a high-level monster has weakened him. However, the ballista it was shot with was filled with a powerful poison that will hurt it badly over the next 5 minutes. The griffin looks exhausted, but it summons the strength to attack and hurl itself at Nox, who smiles as he sees that it would only take 5 minutes. His purple aura and glowing gears begin to emerge from his body, activating the ghost time. When he sees a giant claw approaching, he realizes how different playing it is from seeing it in reality. With a broad smile of excitement, he decides that he won't die and lunges at the griffin with inhuman speed, delivering several brutal slashes that leave it badly wounded. When he finishes his attack, he calls to his brother, who, still surprised to see such a different Nox, decides to obey and orders the attack, riddling the griffin with more shots as it lies on the ground in agony. The protagonist is bursting with power with his sword and is ready to end it all. Despite all his wounds, the griffin rises to hurl himself at the protagonist, who accepts the challenge and runs straight at him. With a great sweep of his sword, he cuts off one of its legs and then, with a great flourish, tears the bird to pieces, leaving it lifeless at his feet. With victory assured, he sheathes his sword just before the end of his ability, giving him the rebound effects of the debuff. Still, he stands to the cheers of the crowd. The system tells him that his victory has added 60 days to his life, increasing his life expectancy by 179 days. As the villagers weep with joy, his new allies admire him, and Jiri reassures him Nox can only enjoy this victory. Grayan, for his part, looks on in awe and anger as he sees his little brother defeat a monster that only the masters could defeat. Recognizing his strength, he realizes that the family hierarchy can change and that he must be on the winning side. Later, he approaches Nox to tell him that he will take care of everything while he decides what to do with the loot and sends him to rest. Nox notices his brother panicking, but his priority now is to carry out his plan as he's received a reward for the mission, a griffin heart, which an alchemist can use to increase or decrease someone's stats. Nox quickly brings it to Elena, who is amazed at the ability to create weapons and potions she has only heard of. With no time to waste, Nox asks specifically for an elixir and gives her all the tools she needs to create it quickly, taking the opportunity to offer May and Elena to be servants to the Reinhafer family. The girls don't know what to say since they are commoners. He tells them the same thing he told Jiri, that he will use them as long as they have something he wants and they can do the same in return. However, he will not tolerate treachery. Think about how complicated it is for someone who is not a genius to create something with the core of a monster. Something that has never been done before, let alone with a hidden boss that is designed not to be defeated. On the other hand, the girls swear that they will follow him to the end of the world. With this, the protagonist leaves calm and happy, having made 2 good characters, and warns them that in 3 days they will return to the villa where they will have to prepare the elixir in secret. Then, walking down the corridor with Lavilla, she suddenly stops and tells him that he is very different from what she had heard about him, since he is not someone who thinks only of himself. He asks her to promise him that if things ever get tough for him, he can count on her despite his status. Nox accepts and leaves, telling her to hurry or she might catch a cold. The blonde maiden sees him blush and smiles at his concern. It doesn't take long for his blush to turn red with embarrassment when he sees that Nox is the one who ended up with a cold. He asks her not to say anything so as not to add to his embarrassment. The maid tries to comfort him, but all he sees are ailments, literally listed down to the level, with nothing he can do. Time passes and everyone returns to the mansion, where Rodwell sees the protagonist's new maids, who enter with him. With the parade of nobles also begins the parade of rumors. Everyone talks about the old perverted stories of the younger brother, some out of fear, others without giving him credit for his exploits. Aware that he cannot change his image, he takes advantage of this to adopt the attitude of a villain. With an intimidating look, he chases away all those who have been talking. They all leave when Rodwell tells them that the Patriarch has summoned them all for a private meeting. Nox introduces himself to his father, who asks him if he has anything to tell him. He then tells him that he has heard of his exploits, both in getting everyone back safely and in eradicating corruption from the city. He also mentions that even his brother has recognized his abilities, which strangely surprises the protagonist, who thinks that Grain is up to something. Theo quickly gets to the point, the nearly impossible mission Nox proposed and accomplished. As agreed, he hands him the papers, confirming that Chaders is now his. Nox realizes that Theo has more to say, and indeed, after much deliberation, the Patriarch asks his youngest son if he wants to take his place. This statement leaves the protagonist completely unsettled, unable to understand his father's attitude. Meanwhile, in the desert, a strange man holds a kind of necklace, which he uses to show various things, including Nox and the dead griffin. He then tells a wise old man that the Reinhafer are beginning to move, now that Chaders is in charge of the youngest son. The mysterious masked man instructs his assistant, Kremzer, to prepare for war. Although the old man isn't sure, his boss tells him he has nothing to lose, so he goes all in. Kreezer turns to a little girl and tells her that this is the opportunity he has been waiting for to take over the country. Back at the mansion, Nox is still confused by his father's question. Rodwell saves him by saying that it is too early to answer, but Theo wants an answer now. Therefore, the protagonist decides to decline the offer, claiming that he doesn't feel capable of taking on all the responsibilities that come with being the head of the family. His father hears this somewhat confused, but decides to respect his son's decision and orders him to retire to rest, which Nox does with a polite farewell. Once in his room, Jiri asks him if his father scolded him. Nox tells him that nothing happened that he could not refuse. The maid moves on to the next topic. His new allies are already installed, to which Nox thanks her. Jiri replies that he is only doing his duty, and Nox knows that it is hard to find people who do what they have to do, so she thanks him again and moves on to the important thing, the Eladan Academy, where he has to become the best. Theo, for his part, finds it difficult to talk to his son about the succession. Rodwell sees it as normal for someone so young and unprepared, and thinks that his reluctance would be greater if he had told him about the implications of the position. Theo is dismayed to hear this, knowing that Nox is someone who has decided his future and is afraid not of him, but of something more serious. A fear as great as looking into the bottom of the abyss, the fear of death itself. The butler thinks it might be because of what happened to his mother, which Theo seems to understand with a resigned smile, believing that maybe his son blames him for not being able to protect her. He then turns his attention to his other son, Grain, who also seems to be making moves they should be aware of, which brings back memories of the great massacre he fought in. We now move to the home of Thalia, who is very concerned about her dress. Emma notices that she has worn 20 changes of clothes and suspects that she is very upset about something. The little redhead is still looking for accessories for her dress and tells her that she is nervous about being accepted into the academy. Her maid, however, thinks her excitement is about seeing her fiancé, Nox. Upon hearing this, Thalia blushes up to her ears and avoids answering the question about her outfit, which annoys Emma, who ignores her as well, which eventually angers her and causes the little redhead to throw a tantrum. Back at the mansion, the protagonist meets his new ally, Elena, who is sleeping on a table. When she wakes up, her face is haggard from overwork, so Nox, who wanted to get his elixir, prefers to ask her if she is alright. May appears to tell her that this is how her friend gets when she is very concentrated, but that she will take care of her. Elena cheerfully interrupts them to show them the elixir, which is glowing on the table. Nox is surprised and slowly approaches it until she takes it in her hands, at which point she reveals all its characteristics. It is a wind elixir that increases stamina by 1 and dexterity by 3. Nox takes it and Elena asks him what he thinks of it. The system reveals that the elixir's effects increase by 200% when used by a person with Elena's talent. Nox looks at it cheerfully, since dexterity is a hidden stat that combines nicely with genie time. She drinks the elixir, causing a huge blue wing of mana to burst out of her body and be absorbed into it. With a broad smile on her face, she feels that all the preparations for the academy are complete, so she decides to leave with Jiri. She appreciates all of his current positive traits. He is a genius with the sword and has great mana perception, as well as genius insight, memorization, acting, and steel mentality. With 150 days to live and his genius mana sensitivity activated, the day finally arrives. He arrives at the academy in an imposing manner, gets out of his carriage, and is immediately recognized by all the students, who start whispering all the rumors about Nox. The protagonist goes into villain mode and says loudly that all this noise sounds like dogs barking, which intimidates everyone. Jiri sees this worried reception and notices someone approaching. It is Emma, who greets him cheerfully. Nox trembles, as does his acting ability, and greets her, knowing what is coming. At the same time, Thalia, who is in her carriage, becomes nervous when she hears her fiancé's name and gives herself a makeover before disembarking like a refined lady. After seeing her, the protagonist thinks that although he knew something like this could happen, he did not think it likely. He remembers that before she left, Lorna gave him news that frightened him, that he was engaged to his future enemy. News that, according to his maid, everyone knew but him. After checking with the rest of the family, he resigned himself to being betrothed to Thalia, who comes to greet him cheerfully in the present. They have a rather awkward exchange of words, with a cheerful Thalia and a nervous Nox. Luckily or unluckily for the Prota, they are interrupted by the arrival of a figure that puts him on alert. Another genius of the academy, the star of the merchants and head of the Rivalin family, who has enough money to dominate the continent. This is another red-haired girl with a stern appearance named Eleanor Rivalin, who immediately recognizes Nox, as she had an old grudge against him. Nox, out of options, greets her, only for the girl to remind him that she is the noble woman of the merchant family he despised in the past, and to give him a malicious smile. Nox is aware that Eleanor, the only daughter of the Rivalin family, possesses a fortune capable of moving continents. In the future, she will be the chief financial dominatrix of the game, known by her nickname, the Vixen of Wealth, which once again makes him tremble with nervousness. Nox remembers his first encounter with her when, like a spoiled child, he scorned her for the way her family had achieved their status, ending with a "Die, you idiot bitch, get out of my sight," leaving the poor girl in tears. Then the protagonist realizes that it's his own bad karma coming back to haunt him. The bad thing is that now it's also his own karma, so he looks away helplessly. Thalia looks at him in confusion, and Nox can only think of how he ended up between two redheads who might one day stab him in the heart. Eleanor notices his nervousness. Nox tries to compose himself to tell her to get lost, which makes her recognize him as the old Nox. Without hesitation, he asks her if she wants recognition, which makes the girl hostile, telling him that she doesn't expect anything good from the family. He decides to check Eleanor's statistics. Despite being a 15-year-old girl, she's a whiz at math and acting. She also has Northern Gumel's sword technique as a negative factor. She is vain and proud and has an active ability called Rich Merchant's Eye. She recognizes that the Rivalin family earned their noble position as Eleanor's father Clarkson bought it. Although the girl does not like her status, she must use it. This has kept them in a perpetual state of anger, which is only exacerbated by Nox. The animosity is still present when they say their ungracious goodbyes. Nox takes Thalia with him to the opening ceremony. Already at the ceremony, Nox thinks that if he can't get rid of her, he'll try to take advantage of the situation. Seeing that the place is full of noble children, he thinks about how he should move to recruit the strongest ones, of which he only knows two, Eleanor and Paracelsus. He thinks about how to gain allies without abandoning the main story. Although his current concern is that many nobles are following him with their eyes, Jiri, very nervous about this, tells him that he is very popular. The protagonist nods, but Thalia doesn't think that hostile stares make him popular. Fortunately, a nervous voice interrupts him. All the waiters curtsy at the appearance of a girl eating a popsicle, very perky, white-haired, and extremely petite. Everyone is so focused on her stature that they wonder how she got there, thinking she is a lost child. Only the protagonist knows her identity, a monster whose appearance makes him untrustworthy, Noah of Trinity, of unknown age, and with the attribute of ice. He is one of the 4 wise men, and his positive traits are being a genius at detecting mana and being carefree. His negative traits are inferiority complex and laziness. Nox thinks aloud that he should be on her side, which confuses Thalia, who overhears him talking. The protagonist only suggests that she not talk if she wants to live. The mini-warrior greets them and introduces herself as their happy new dean, until her attitude quickly changes and she warns them that whoever mentions her stature again will be sent to St. Peter. She then informs them that the welcoming mission will be an act. Everyone is surprised to hear this, as it was not in the contract. However, it is a new rule that the sadistic dean has invented that day to sift the talents. So she opens a huge magic circle at her feet and asks all the students to survive. The protagonist knows that this is where the hard part begins, coming back alive. Then, on an island, the students begin to fall unconscious under the gaze of a bald man with a shiny head, who shouts at them not to sleep in front of him. His cries are in vain, for no one is really conscious, or so he thinks, until he sees the only one who has managed to remain conscious after the fall. Nox, who despite having managed to stay conscious, is still feeling the effects of the forced teleportation. The bald man sees the protagonist approaching with the intention of confirming something, and checks that the bald head of this instructor, named Bernon, is as shiny or shinier than in the game, and remembers that the story tells that his head was once covered with hair. This instructor, who was one of the first graduates of the academy, is jokingly called Takoyaki Bernon because of his bald head. Nevertheless, he is a skilled fighter. However, during an exchange of glances, the instructor notices that the protagonist looks at him with pity, feeling sorry for the way he is mocked for his shiny head. Determined to change his attitude, Nox activates his acting skills. The bald man thinks he is making fun of him, but Nox changes the subject and talks about the test. The bald man agrees and tells him to cover his ears as he will wake up the sleepyheads. He obeys. When Burning claps his hands, a big sound wave is created that wakes everyone up, especially one of the students who is very annoyed by the sound and insults the person who made it. Unfortunately, the bald guy was right behind him and gave him a shot. With that, they turn their attention to Bernon, or rather his shiny forehead, which hurts their eyesight and annoys the bald guy even more. After some time has passed and those who didn't wake up have been moved to a safe area, he explains the entrance test, which Nox simply summarizes as, you have to hunt as many monsters as possible on the island from which a colored jewel will fall, the value of which increases the less mana it has, which is usually the other way around. This is because the test has 2 goals. On the one hand, the amount of mana you have, since the speed with which you wake up after No's magic depends on it. The second is to detect mana, no matter how weak it is, so they will have to filter the stones in the labyrinth created by the Dean. Vernon ends his explanation by telling them that there are more monsters than all the worms have ever seen in their lives, so this time he will give them the advantage of forming teams of 8. All the students look at each other as small daggers appear for each of them. Then the teacher suggests that they begin to move. Many, still confused, try to talk to the instructor, who quickly disappears. Paracelsus and a boy, who according to Nox is one of the strongest, observe the situation while a woman asks for help to rescue a blonde princess. Eleanor uses the money to buy some equipment, and many look at her with some discomfort. This one ignores them, thinking that she really has no use for normal earnings in this place. If he wants to continue to grow, he must do so knowingly, taking every advantage, so he heads into the forest, determined to go it alone. From a distance, Vernon is still surprised that the protagonist was able to stand his ground in the face of the Dean's magic, and even more so now that he sees him going into the forest alone. He thinks he is not afraid of danger, although his gaze says otherwise, and he is curious to see what the hidden dragon of the Reinhafer will do, which just happens to leave behind a field of defeated monsters and a large number of jewels, which he does not bother to collect. As he continues on his way, Nox is followed by a strange figure with long white hair. Elsewhere, surrounded by monsters, Thalia, the red-haired girl from earlier, and the princess they call Penelope are ready to attack. However, all Thalia can think about is that her fiancé has escaped, so she loses her concentration. The princess's assistant tells her to be content and happy that she is protecting her. After a hard battle, they manage to defeat all the monsters and collect a purple crystal full of mana, which makes the princess think it is the ultimate reward. However, both her assistant and she suspect that since this is a test of a sage, it must not be that easy, so they must continue. However, most of her team is too degraded to continue, which upsets the assistant as she thinks that if they don't, they may fail in their goal of having the princess ascend to the leadership of Archihim's empire, which is rotten to the core, thinking that Penelope can change it. Thalia, completely fresh, suggests that they gather those who can continue on their way, a plan that the princess accepts with some frustration, and feeling a great weight for a figure that seems to be her older brother. Meanwhile, the cold environment causes the protagonist to remember his negative traits, resulting in cold hands and feet. In addition, he lacks air and moves more slowly, so he has to use a simple fire spell to stabilize himself and continue climbing the mountain. As he gets closer to the top, he feels colder and colder. From there, he uses his magic to sense the presence beneath the earth and discovers the truth. The entire island has been formed by magic, from the mountain to the monsters. Not knowing how much mana Noah has to do such a thing, he decides that it is not important for the moment. Continuing on his way, he encounters several ice trolls, which he recognizes as the main newbie killers. They are no problem for him. He begins to fight, easily dodging their blows until one almost manages to connect with him. In the end, the protagonist destroys his weapons and realizes that Noah is obsessed with talented students. At the same time, he doubts that she has decided to send them against frost giants as they are too difficult for normal youngsters. So much so that such a training would be a massacre in terms of difficulty. Then he deduces that there is something else as the white-haired figure continues to watch him. Nox lunges at the trolls, who are curiously in a repeating formation. Recognizing their patterns, he can easily dance among them. He reaches the end of the line and manages a strong thrust against the last troll, which ends up shattered on the ground. A gray crystal emerges from the monster's body, which Nox takes. He knows very well that it was the very piece Noah was hiding, and he will use it to exchange it for the scroll he needs most, the one he will use to boost his Hour of Genius skill. We go to Eleanor's location and hear that her team has another pink jewel, which they believe will give them the upper hand. Although the millionaire agrees, she remembers how the protagonist left her alone. After her fight with Nox, she remembers her past, when her father scolded her and said that they could only be a family that no one would look down on if they went higher, and that they needed all the support they could get. So he sent the little girl to give young Nox everything he wanted. Back in the present, Eleanor assumes that Nox knows some secret. With her cheerful attitude, she offers them all to accompany her upstairs to get more jewels in exchange for a generous reward, of course. Some listen to her, but others refuse because it is dangerous. She insists that she will increase the reward to convince some of them. She thinks that everything is solved with money, although the most important thing for her now is to find out what Nox thinks. With her cheerful attitude, she decides to continue. On the other hand, Nox thinks that it is worth taking this risk to improve her Genius Hour skill, which is very complicated to improve unless she unlocks the skill attribute. So he must proceed with his plan, regardless of whether it attracts attention. When he is ready to continue, he feels something approaching and deflects the blow. His face fills with fear as he sees the broad smile of Paracelsus, who tells him that he is glad to see him. The protagonist breaks out in a cold sweat as he watches the exchange of glances, thinking that this should not happen. He observes the statistics of the sword-fighting genius, who is also a medical genius. He is also competitive, fierce with the strong and kind to the weak, lazy, obsessive, and contemptuous of the noble. And rightly, he should not be there, because in the story in this chapter, he should face the real protagonist of the game to be inspired by his personality after he saved Eleanor from falling into the void. He is worried that the story is so wrong, and his nervousness increases when he has to stop a knife thrown by his rival, who asks him for the jewel. The protagonist activates his acting skills to stand his ground and defend himself as best he can against Paracelsus's big blows, thinking that since there is no protagonist of the game in this line, he must stop it himself. Paracelsus, not understanding, continues his attack until they are separated and offers him a deal, the jewel in exchange for letting him continue on his way.